Hey everyone, welcome. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notifications bell. We're gonna have a fun show tonight. Interesting topic that might surprise you all. Bet you can't guess what I'm gonna talk about. You probably won't see it coming, but it'll be a lot of fun. I can guarantee that. So there we go. Let's go. Let's do our show. All right, let's do it.
I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
All right, everybody. Welcome. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We got a fun topic to talk about tonight. It's going to be interesting. But yeah, before we get into that, why don't we quickly go over some business announcements for those of you who want the lowdown on everything. Couple quick business announcements. First business announcement is that the Center for Political Innovation, the CPI, Center for Political Innovation, is back in business. We just had a great afternoon weekly meeting. It went very, very well, and we are back in business. And we're going to be talking about a very, very, I guess, interesting topic tonight, but let me get to the business announcement. So if you want to join the Center for Political Innovation, you can join on our website. February 19th in Washington, D.C., there's going to be a very important anti-war demonstration, and we plan to be attending that anti-war demonstration. And we are going to be official endorsers of it. We are in the process of becoming an official sponsor of the February 19th Rage Against the War Machine a demonstration. So that's very exciting. February 19th. And the Center for Political Innovation, our next conference, our next public event is going to be on March 25th, and it'll be in Washington, D.C. More details about that event are coming soon. So hang in there and wait for the exciting details about that event, which are yet to come. Very good stuff. So if you want to be involved in all of that, join the Center for Political Innovation. Writing down your comment there, Tom. Just trying to writing down your super chat. The next bit of information that I would like to share with people tonight, the next little bit of information that is very important that I'd like to share with people is that if you want to become a member of our Patreon community, like to become a member of our Patreon community, you can do so. And, if you're a part of the Patreon community, you get access to patrons only streams that are much smaller and intimate, where I just answer people's questions for an hour and you can ask me whatever you want. So you have that. It's the patrons only stream. And you get our books sent to you for free, generally. If you're a member of the Patreon, you generally get our books sent to you for free. So sign up on the Patreon if you want to be part of that. Now, the way we generally do things on these streams is I give my opening remarks, and my opening remarks are then followed by the roll call, where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. And then after that, after the roll call, then I answer super chat questions for the rest of the night. We already got the first super chat, Tom asking about the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski. I've got that, and got plenty to say about that. That'll be our first super chat, and I'll be writing the super chats down as our broadcast goes along. So if you have something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, shoot me a super chat. I will write it down and we'll go from there. That is how it works. So those are the business announcements. Mark your calendars for February 19th for the very important anti-war demonstration set to take place in Washington, D.C. And mark your calendar for March 25th for the very important Center for Political Innovation public event that is set to take place. Further announcements of that event are coming soon. Details to emerge soon. Mark your calendars. If you want me to talk about something in the second half of the show, send me a super chat. And now we'll just start the opening remarks. Folks, I want to start out by saying this. Some people watch these streams and they say, Caleb talks like he knows everything. Well, I don't know everything. And on these streams, often I feel like we are learning together. There are topics that we just barely touched on when these streams started. But as we moved along, this is stream number 465, I believe, we got to learn more about them. Our understanding evolved, and that we're learning here. We're learning on these streams. We are learning together. And that part of what we're doing on these streams is we are learning about America, right? We are people that have an anti-imperialist and a socialist perspective. We're looking to beat down the system of oppression and build up a whole new world, government of action that fights for working families. However, part of what we're doing is we're recognizing that if we really want to build a political movement in the United States to move the United States towards socialism, we have to learn about America, and we have to learn about our own country and our own culture. And there are people watching this from around the world who are also trying to learn about America and learn about American culture. And the last stream we did, I was trying to make a point about Bonapartism and such, and I talked about the Ku Klux Klan. And then somebody on the stream, they asked a super chat. They gave a super chat and asked me about the Ku Klux Klan. And I went on for quite a bit. And I realized that, the Ku Klux Klan, the awful, racist, white supremacist organization, that's been a big part of America. And it started in the 1870s, and then it was rebooted in 1914, and then there was another reboot of it in the 50s, and then there was another reboot of it in 1978. And, the Ku Klux Klan is a thing that just shows up in America. Throughout American history, from the end of the Civil War up to now, every so often, the Ku Klux Klan stuff starts up again. And so in order to really understand American culture and American history, you have to recognize that evil organization called the Ku Klux Klan, that racist, white supremacist entity, that's just a recurring theme in U.S. culture. And on the recent stream, we talked about it, and we talked about the different roles, and that when the Ku Klux Klan first emerged, it was, a pushback against Reconstruction. It was an attempt to kind of keep the Civil War going. The next time it showed up, it was a Bonapartist maneuver by the Democratic Party. The next time it showed up, it was a reaction to the Civil Rights Movement. The next time it showed up, it was some kind of intelligence operation. And now it's more of a meme. It's a bunch of racist symbols that people use to express their bigotry. We talked about it, right? And that throughout American history, there are things that just keep showing up over and over and over again. And they show up over and over again. And each time they show up, they take on a little bit of a different meaning. And so that got me thinking. Today I was at the gym and I was exercising and I was thinking about what am I going to talk about on the stream, and sweat was pouring down my face. And I did a long cardio exercise at the gym today. I went for about an hour and 10 minutes. Heavy cardio exercise. And I actually had the idea tonight that we would talk about another theme that just keeps showing up in American history since the end of the Second World War. There's something that just keeps showing up. It's a trend in American society that will not die, and it just keeps showing up over and over and over again. However, each time it comes around, it seems to bring with it yet another different meaning and different interpretation. And it is something that is it's part of American culture. It's something that everyone in America knows about, and every so often it flares up and there's a lot of interest in it, and then it goes away again. And then about a decade later, interest in it flares up, but it's a little bit different. It's always a little bit different every time it comes around. But it's just an aspect of American culture. It's just something that we talk about here in America. And they have it in other countries too. I mean, there's different, global interpretations. But in America, what I'm about to talk to you about, can anyone guess what it is? I'm going to talk about a trend in U.S. popular culture, a trend among Americans that has just kind of kept floating around in U.S. society, taking on different meanings and different contexts, but it's just a recurring theme in American culture. Well, what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is UFOs. That's right, UFOs. Gavin, did you cheat? Did you cheat, Gavin? How did you know I was going to talk about that? That's what I'm talking about, UFOs. I'm talking about unidentified flying objects. That's what I'm on here to talk about. Unidentified flying objects, a recurring theme in American culture. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. UFOs have been a thing that Americans have talked about, and they've been part of American popular culture over and over and over again. Okay. There you go. There you go. So we're going to talk about it. So UFOs, right? People say, where does the UFO thing start, right? All throughout history, people have looked up at the sky and seen things they don't know what they are, right? There's nothing particularly new about that. The Quran, I believe, references flying discs. There's passages in the Bible that people say are about UFOs. There's all kinds of ancient civilizations that have seen stuff in the sky. They don't know what it is. This is a recurring theme, right? It's a recurring theme throughout human history. So you can't really say where it started. But the American UFO culture, right? The American UFO culture all traces back to July 8th, 1947. July 8th, 1947, the U.S. Air Force put out a statement saying that it was the Roswell Army Airfield, put out a statement July 8th, 1947, saying that they had recovered a, quote, flying disc. And then they retracted their statement afterwards and said it was a weather balloon. And that was really the beginning of the UFO craze in American culture. And it's very interesting. So all that happened was there was an Army airfield base. They made a public statement. We have picked up a flying disc. We've picked up a flying disc, and then after that, they came back and said, no, it was a weather balloon. And that was the beginning of UFO culture. And there was all this, and after that, all throughout the United States, people started saying they saw flying saucers. And that became the theme in American culture. Flying saucers, right? UFO just means unidentified flying object. But ever since then, Americans have claimed that they've seen flying saucers, have talked about it. Now, what's interesting is nobody necessarily said these things were aliens. Nobody. In the U.S. military, when they recovered this flying disc and then they retracted it, no point did they say it was aliens. Nobody ever said they were aliens. No one ever said that. The unidentified flying object, UFO, just means that. It just means UFO. That's all it means. It could be anything. It's just something in the sky that is unidentified. And a flying disc. What the hell is a flying disc, right? Who says that has to be aliens? No one ever decided it had to be aliens. And there were people who thought these were, these flying discs were Soviet spacecraft. Okay. People thought they were Soviet spacecraft. The Soviet Union had sent them over. It was the beginning of a nuclear war. The Cold War had just started, 1947. There were people who thought it was all kinds of different things. There were all kinds of theories about what they were. But starting after July 8th, 1947, all of a sudden, everywhere in the United States, people started seeing these flying saucers and claiming that they'd seen them. A lot of people, they were hallucinating or it was hoaxes. Not necessarily all of them. I think there's some people that genuinely thought they saw something in the sky. And it was a craze that started in 1947, 2 years after the end of the Second World War. All over the United States, people started claiming they saw UFOs. So much so that there was actually a country bluegrass song that was a hit at the time that talked about it. And I actually found a non-copyrighted version. This was a hit song in 1947 that people played on the radio, and it was about the flying saucer UFO phenomenon. And all over the country in 1947, people started seeing and claiming they saw flying saucers. So much so that this was recorded. This is a much more recent version of it. I couldn't play the original one because it's copyrighted. So I found a performance of it by some guy. So here is some guy performing the hit song from 1947 called Flying Saucers.
I have a slide. You better pray to the Lord when you see those flying saucers. It might be the coming of Judgment Day. It's a sign, there's no doubt of the trouble that's about. So I say, my friend, you better start to pray. When you see your saucer fly like you're coming through the sky, you should realize the price you'll have to pay. You better pray to the Lord when you see those flying saucers. Might be the coming of the Judgment Day. Now many people think the saucers might be someone's foolish dream. Maybe they were sent down here from Mars. If you just stop and think, you realize that's what it means. They're more than atom bombs, they're falling stars. And though the war may be through, there's regrets and trouble brewing, and those flying saucers may be just a sign that if peace doesn't come, it'll be the end of some. So repent today, you're running out of time. They're a terrifying sight as they fly on day and night. It's a warning that we'd better mend our ways. You better pray to the Lord when you see the flying saucers. Might be the coming of the Judgment Day. Get your thoughts. Now many people think the saucers might be someone's foolish dream. Maybe they were sent down here from Mars. If you just stop and think, you realize that's what it means. They're more than atom bombs, they're falling stars. And though the war may be through, there's this sense of trouble brewing, and those flying saucers may be just a sign that if peace doesn't come, it'll be the end of some. So repent today, you're running out of time. They're a terrifying sight as they fly on day and night. It's a warning that we better mend our ways. You better pray to the Lord when you see those flying saucers. Might be the coming of the Judgment Day.
So there you go. That was actually a hit song from 1947 by a bluegrass band. And the last verse of that song actually, I think, points to something deeper. I'm somebody who likes old horror movies. You know that I like horror movies. But that last verse, right? The last verse of the song, though the war may be through, there's unrest and trouble brewing. Those flying saucers may be just a sign that if peace doesn't come, that'll be the end of some. So repent today, you're running out of time. That kind of speaks to a theme that you see in a lot of horror movies from the 1950s. And it speaks to something about the human condition, which is trauma, right? World War II was a hugely traumatic event. Lots of death and killing and bombing and torture and gas chambers and mass death. And it was a horrific event. And then after World War II was over, the United States went from the Great Depression to suddenly having the best economy in the world, right? We were in depression level conditions. People were starving on our streets. And then World War II happened, and then all of a sudden, the United States was at the center of the post-World War II economic boom. So suddenly we gone from people starving on the streets, Great Depression, to, at that point, the highest standard of living in the world. The rest of the world had been blown up and destroyed by the Second World War. The United States was at the center of the global economy. So suddenly people who were living in crammed conditions with 5 other people who might have been homeless, all of a sudden you have this booming U.S. economy. This is when the suburbs get going, and especially for like white American industrial workers, people who worked in the steel mills, people who worked in the auto plants. Life got to be very good. All right, this was the golden era for America. However, even though all of a sudden people had good paying jobs and people, you talk about the American family where the wife doesn't have to work and the father who doesn't even have a high school diploma can work at the auto plant and he's paying for the whole family and putting kids through college and he has a nice fancy car. There's still this terror because the traumatic experience of the Second World War doesn't go away. And that's one thing they talk about people that have trauma, that they, even though there may not be a danger, they're always looking over their shoulder, right? People, they talk about, soldiers, people who come home from war with PTSD, right? They see something or they're jumping, it's, and that last verse was basically, yeah, everything seems nice, but how do we know it really is? And if you look at a lot of these horror movies from the 1950s, right? They've got Godzilla, and it's this monster, that's destroying Tokyo. And, they've got a giant ant that's attacking a city. And they've got they got all kinds of different giant species like destroying cities, right? That's a big theme in horror movies from the 1950s. I'm talking about Invasion of the Body Snatchers and all that. It's like everything seems like it's okay. But beneath the surface, everyone is traumatized by the horror of war. Everyone is still on edge and nervous. And the flying saucer thing, the fact that all these people are seeing flying saucers, right? They think that there's something in the sky and maybe it's the Soviet Union or it's communists or whatever. That was very widespread. A lot of people were very, very damaged by the Second World War, and they just couldn't accept that everything was all right in the United States, right? And they talk about, there's other manifestations of it. There's a rise of juvenile delinquency during the 1950s, McCarthyism, this paranoia. Oh, my God, there's commies everywhere. It was like something, even though the economy was really, really good, you can't just get over the Second World War. You can't just get over the Depression. And all these people are coming into post-World War II America where the economy is really, really strong and everything's good, and they're not well psychologically. They've got damage. What's interesting is that nobody ever said, I mean, obviously people did say, but, there's nothing intrinsic in the Roswell incident of 1947, July 8th, 1947. There's nothing in there that says aliens. Nothing. There's nothing about that incident. They put up a statement, they've retracted, they've got a flying disc, and then they say, oh, no, it wasn't, it was a weather balloon. And that's the end of the story. There's nothing in there about aliens. But Hollywood picked up on the idea that UFOs mean aliens. That became a big Hollywood thing. And so starting the 1950s, Hollywood picked up on that, and suddenly there's science fiction movie after science fiction movie where UFO flying saucers must be aliens. And that suddenly became how the conversation shifted. And that was never an intrinsic part of it. You heard that song. A lot of those people thought they were angels coming because of the end times. A lot of people thought they were demons from hell. A lot of people thought they were Russians. They're Russian communists, with like spy planes to figure out where to drop the nukes. People thought that all kinds of different theories about what they were. However, 1947, you have the incident. And then after that, Hollywood and television decided UFOs equal aliens. And it got just kind of drummed into our culture that no, UFO, if someone believes in UFOs, they mean aliens. They mean little green men from space. That's what UFOs are. And that was very much, that comes from Hollywood. And that comes from the media. And that does not come from any of the stuff that happened. None of these people that were looking up in the sky and saying that were necessarily saying they were aliens. All these people in 1947 were seeing flying saucers. They didn't know what they were. And then the media decided it must be aliens. And aliens sounds pretty silly. And so everyone just kind of made a joke out of it. And we all kind of moved on. And then, you know, it was something in the 1950s, you know, the Twilight Zone and television shows. There are all kinds of movies about men from outer space. There's actually one movie that's a UFO movie from the 1950s that is pretty good. It's called The Day the Earth Stood Still. And it's a movie that is about the danger of nuclear war. And I would recommend going to watch The Day the Earth Stood Still. It's a pretty well-made Hollywood movie, but it's got a kind of anti-nuclear war pacifist message. It's warning about the danger of nuclear war. So I would recommend that. And, you know, the Twilight Zone. If you watch the Twilight Zone, after McCarthyism started to be a threat to the ruling class, and after members of Congress, there was a member of Congress who committed suicide because Joe McCarthy found out his son was gay and was blackmailing him. And after McCarthyism became so much of a threat to the ruling class, and after Stalin died, and, you know, McCarthyism was winding down, you had, you know, a TV show called The Twilight Zone that was very popular in the United States. And The Twilight Zone was about Cold War liberalism. It was about McCarthyists are extremists and fascists, and the Soviet Union, they're also, you know, extremists and communists, and the American way of life is to be against totalitarianism. And a lot of the episodes of The Twilight Zone are all about anti-totalitarianism, right? It's about, we don't want to be like the Soviets. We don't want to be like the crazy McCarthyists. And, you know, a lot of the episodes of The Twilight Zone relate to UFOs. And really, you know, up through the 50s, even up into the 60s, the idea that UFOs equal space aliens, and there's all kinds of Hollywood movies about them. That was just a big part of Hollywood. It was a big part of American television, whatever. Things, of course, got weird in the 1960s, you know, 1968, 69, 1970, 71, 72. There's a big political crisis in the United States. The black people are rebelling. You have urban rebellions sweeping the country in 1968 after the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You had big protests against the Vietnam War. And you had big protests on the college campuses and all kinds of unrest. And Richard Nixon became president. And, you know, the 1970s was a very confused time. Richard Nixon was this strongman, Bonapartist president who came in there and he was going to crush, and he did crush the Black Panther Party with COINTELPRO. And he stabilized things, and he pulled the U.S. troops out of Vietnam, and he lowered the voting age to 18, and he took a lot of dramatic moves intended to stabilize the U.S. society. And then when it was pretty clear that the political turmoil of the 1960s was over, Richard Nixon was driven out of office because he was a Bonapartist. They don't like, you know, strong men, even if they do exactly what capitalism needs. Even if they do bring stability to U.S. society, they still don't like people having that much power. So Richard Nixon is driven out of office. And then Gerald Ford takes office. Gerald Ford is the only president in American history who never got voted for. He was never elected president. He was never elected vice president. And Gerald Ford is president. And Gerald Ford's very unpopular because nobody ever voted for him, right? He was never elected vice president. He was never elected president. He was Speaker of the House. And when Spiro Agnew left, he became vice president. And then when Nixon left, he became president. Gerald Ford was president. He was not very popular. Everyone was making fun of him because he was a little bit of a klutz and he would trip and fall down and stuff. So coming out of the 1960s, you know, we had Nixon, we had Gerald Ford, but then out of nowhere, we got the new incarnation of the new left, right? The Democratic Party had gone through all kinds of wild reinventions of itself during the 1960s. It was now no longer the party of labor unions. It was no longer the party of Roosevelt. Now it was a new left political party. It was all about environmentalism and counterculture and all of that. So, of course, they need a new face for the Democratic Party. And this individual has emerged to become the governor of Georgia, famous peanut farmer, Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter emerges. So Jimmy Carter, 1976, no one had ever heard of him. He kind of came out of nowhere. And he was this new superstar of the Democratic Party. Jimmy Carter, a peanut farmer from Georgia. But one thing that was all over the news when Jimmy Carter was running for president is that Jimmy Carter claimed he had a UFO experience. And this is the actual voice of Jimmy Carter while he was running for president, he gave interviews. He gave interviews about the fact, and it was just a big part of his campaign, that he had seen a UFO and that when he got elected, he was going to reveal all the government secrets about UFOs. This is Jimmy Carter.
And I was in a small South Georgia town one night outside the schoolhouse waiting to eat supper and to talk to them. And all of us, there were 26 men, I believe, if I remember right, all of us saw a very bright light in the western sky. And it was bright enough to attract our attention, much brighter than a star. And it got closer and closer, and then it seemed to stop in its proximity to us. And then the color of it changed from white to blue to red. And it stayed there for a while. All of us were aghast at what we were seeing, couldn't figure it out. And then the light, that's all we could see, not a solid object, the light then slowly disappeared back into the direction from which it came.
So Jimmy Carter, like a big part of his campaign was that he had seen a UFO, he believed in UFOs, and when he got elected, Jimmy Carter was going to reveal all the government secrets. He was going to declassify everything and tell everyone about UFOs. Seriously, this was a big part of Jimmy Carter's, his presidency. However, when he got elected, suddenly he forgot all about that. Never said anything about it after that. But a lot of like hippie kind of people, counterculture people, thought Jimmy Carter was pretty cool because he believed in UFOs. They thought he was a very, very cool guy. And that was part of his selling campaign. Is he was a hippie. He was like a hip young guy. He'd seen UFOs, man. Vote for Jimmy Carter, man. He saw some UFOs. I bet he's even smoked some weed. It was like a selling point. And of course, when he got elected, he forgot all about it. Okay. Writing it down. Okay. So there you go. And that was just that was part of Jimmy Carter's selling point, but then he forgot all about it. However, there's another very important side of this UFO thing that a lot of people don't know about, which is that the Nation of Islam, that's the religion of Malcolm X, that UFOs are a very big part of their religion. Now, many people do not realize this, but during the Second World War, it was after the Second World War, Elijah Muhammad was confronted with the question of how will the white man be defeated, right? Because the Nation of Islam, their belief is that, there's like a historical rotation going on, and that starting in a certain year, it is now the time for the black man to be the leader of the world, right? That the white man was supposed to lead at this point, but then starting in a certain year, the black man will become the new ruler of the world, the new leader. And so after World War II, there became a little bit of a problem. There became a little bit of a problem because the fact that the white man had the atomic bomb. Wrote it down. Became a little bit of a problem that the white man had the atomic bomb. And so it became a question, right? If the white man has the atomic bomb, how is the black man going to defeat the white man? It was a big problem. So Elijah Muhammad, when the whole UFO thing started in 1947, Elijah Muhammad said these were, he called them mother wheels sent by God to defeat the white man. And Minister Louis Farrakhan, the leader of the Nation of Islam now, he has talked at great length about what he believes UFOs are. And I have a lot of respect for Minister Farrakhan. He's an anti-imperialist. He is very, very solid. He was marching against the bombing of Libya. And, he's an important leader of the black community. And he is an anti-imperialist, pro-Cuba, pro-China, pro-Venezuela. And there are many, many lectures on the internet by Minister Louis Farrakhan about what he believes about UFOs. So I thought I might play one for you.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad told us of a giant mothership that is made like the universe, a sphere and spheres within spheres. The white folk call them unidentified flying objects. He's coming out with a movie to let you know what's about to come down, but he put it in film, and I said, I'm not going to let him give you a false version. I'm going to tell you what the real deal is so that you're not going to be tricked. This is no dudes from out in Mars. No. The life that is on Mars is germane to that atmosphere. You can't live on another planet. The water is different, the atmosphere is different, the vegetation is different. You are born of this atmosphere, this water, this vegetation, and this is the only planet you can survive on. You can visit those planets in a contraption, but don't come out. You can't make it. Ain't nobody coming from Mars to visit you. They want to give the credit to some Martians when it's really God and the host of his angels that have been prepared to wipe this nation from the face of the earth before the white man came into existence. Now let me tell you how it's going to be, as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad taught us. Ezekiel in the Old Testament saw wheels that looked like a cloud by day but a pillar of fire by night. That was a vision that Ezekiel had. Now that vision is reality. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that that wheel was built on the island of Nippon, which is now called Japan, by some of the original scientists. It took $15 billion in gold at that time to build it. It is made of the toughest steel. America does not know yet the steel, the composition to make an instrument like it. It is a circular plane. And the Bible says of it that it never makes turns. The wheel didn't make turns. Because of its circular nature, it can stop and then shoot in all directions at thousands of miles of speed an hour. Listen now, listen. He said there are 1,500 of these small wheels in this mother wheel, which is a half a mile by a half mile. It's like a small human-built planet. Each one of these planes carry 3 bombs. The bombs that are used on these planes, and by the way, these planes are not new. Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun. They have even markings in areas of the earth where they make markings of these planes in ancient writings because they're not new to the original man. White folk ain't the first people that fly. We flew before there was a white man. You can take it or leave it. How in the world could he fly first when we the ones that gave him the mathematics on which he is flying? We were asleep to allow the new man to rule. Now look, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that the wheels, we had these planes thousands of years ago, and these are the planes that we use to set up mountains on the earth.
So there you go. I could listen to Minister Farrakhan all day long. So I had to stop it before I got out of control. But I really love listening to Minister Farrakhan. He's a very good orator. But that's him talking about UFOs. You know, now I, of course, because this is a communist stream, I would be in complete dereliction of duty if we did not talk about the very famous Trotskyite UFO cult, right? I mean, do we say cult? I don't know. You know, right? But there was a Trotskyist leader in Argentina. There was a Trotskyist leader in Argentina named Luis Posada. And Luis Posadas, he was the leader of the Trotskyites of Argentina. He was arrested by the military dictatorship that was being backed by the United States. J. Posadas, right? J. Posadas. And he was arrested and he was in prison. He was tortured in prison. And while he was in prison, he apparently had some kind of vision, and he came to the conclusion that the UFOs proved that socialism existed on other planets. Why? Because only socialism could create the advanced technology that could make UFOs. And he came out of prison convinced that UFOs were proof that there were other planets that had socialism. And he was convinced that the space aliens from this other socialist planet were watching planet Earth and waiting until there was a nuclear war. And that at the moment that a nuclear war was starting, they would intervene to stop the nuclear war. That was the idea. They would intervene to stop the nuclear war. And there is a whole wing of Trotskyism. There's not very many of them. I think there's only like one or two people in the United States who believe this. But in Latin America, this is a big current among Trotskyists. This UFO Trotskyism, people call it. J. Posadist. They even have their own Fourth International, the Fourth International Posadist. And they believe that UFOs are proof of the existence of socialism on other planets. This is their belief. The Marxist Internet Archive even has a collection of their writings. I will link it here in the chat. These are the UFO Trotskyites. Basically, it's a whole wing of global Trotskyism that is really into UFOs, right? So the big story about the Posadists is that they were in Cuba at one point. They were in Cuba, supporting Fidel Castro, and they started attacking foreign embassies, right? They started attacking foreign embassies because they were hoping to spark the nuclear war that would make the space aliens come down. And so they got kicked out of Cuba. Cuba wasn't thrilled with that, and so it kicked them out of Cuba. But they were attacking foreign embassies in Cuba, hoping that this would spark a nuclear war between the socialist countries and the capitalist countries, at which point the space aliens would show up and save the day. Now, many people have pointed out that this narrative that the Posadists, the UFO Trotskyites had, this narrative is actually very similar to the TV show Star Trek. On Star Trek, if you watch, I think they had a movie called First Contact. That's actually how the movie starts, right? There's a nuclear war. Star Trek, the backstory of Star Trek is that, there was a nuclear war, and then the Vulcans landed and brought peace and gave warp speed technology to the humans. And many people have pointed out that, maybe Jay Posadas, Juan Posadas, maybe he actually watched Star Trek and got the idea. That could have been what it was. Or maybe Star Trek got the idea from Juan Posadas. Who knows? But there's an odd similarity in the backstory that, Juan Posadas, his political theories and the backstory of Star Trek are exactly the same. And many people have pointed out that's pretty weird. But I'll link. He actually wrote this pamphlet called Flying Saucers, The Process of Matter and Energy, Science, the revolutionary working class struggle, and the future of mankind. That is a manifesto that they published in 1968. Quite a name. Flying saucers, the process of matter and energy, science, the revolutionary working class struggle, and the socialist future of mankind. They got everything possible into that title. They did not miss anything in that title. So there you go. Okay, I'm getting there. Hold on. Writing it down. But anyhow, so that was all in the 60s. Right? That you had, or in the 60s and 70s, you had the Posadists, and some people think that could have been a CIA thing. Why are they going around attacking foreign embassies in Cuba? You had the Posadists, which are, they still exist. There's still people all over Latin America that are followers of this wing of UFO Trotskyism. So there's that. There's Jimmy Carter saying he believed in UFOs. But then, let's get a little closer to present day. I will never forget this. So you will recall Dennis Kucinich. Remember Dennis Kucinich? I don't know if people know who Dennis Kucinich was. Dennis Kucinich was a member of Congress from Cleveland, Ohio, who was he was a very good guy. He's still alive. He's no longer in Congress. I met him on a number of occasions, and he was a really, really good guy. He started out, he had been the mayor of Cleveland during the 1970s. And he had been like a progressive mayor, and he refused to privatize the electricity in the city. So the banks all stopped lending money to Cleveland, and Cleveland went bankrupt. And so he was kind of, he was seen as a bad mayor. But the reason that the banks wouldn't lend money to Cleveland was because he wouldn't privatize the power. He wasn't going to follow the austerity policy. So he was kind of driven out of office. Then starting in the 80s, he was Roman Catholic, and he started attending anti-nuclear protests. And he started marching against nuclear weapons, marching against nuclear power. He made friends with the Communist Party USA, and he eventually got elected to Congress in the 90s. And he was a left-wing guy. And he was against the Patriot Act, and he was against all the wars, and he went to all the peace rallies in Cleveland. And he was, for somebody who was in Congress, he was about as left-wing as you could get. And, he knew me by face. I was just some college kid when he was in Congress. I was this college kid who went to anti-war, protests, and he knew me by face. And he'd be like, "Hey, Caleb, how are things going at your college?" Like, that was pretty cool. I will never forget, one day I went to a Palestine fundraiser in Cleveland by the Arab American community. And, you just buy your ticket and they assign you a table. They assigned me a table with Dennis Kucinich. And I thought, oh shit, they're going to make me move, right? And I was sitting next to this other woman who was an activist, and we were at the same table. And then the nameplate next to ours was Dennis Kucinich. And this lady's like, "Well, I ain't moving. Like, we figured, okay, they got a member of Congress who's going to sit next to us. They're going to boot us out of here and make somebody more famous than us sit here. So we're like, "I ain't moving." So anyway, Dennis Kucinich and his wife, Elizabeth, they walk in. They're assigned to sit next to us. So they did. And they sat next to us at the Palestine fundraiser. They didn't get up. They didn't make us move. So the whole night we're listening to Arab American speakers and Arab American music, and me and Dennis Kucinich, we had a nice meal, and I sat next to Dennis Kucinich at a Palestine fundraiser. That was pretty wild. And the other wild thing was I had a stack of communist newspapers with me, because that was the whole reason I'd gone to this fundraiser. I was there to give everyone the communist newspaper. Dennis Kucinich, I'll never forget, he saw the Workers' World newspapers I had, and he picked one up. He took one. He just took one, and he folded it up and he put it in his pocket, and he winked at me. And he winks at me like, I thought that was wild. That was wild. That was a wild night. When I accidentally, based on random seating, ended up sitting next to Dennis Kucinich at a Palestine fundraiser. And not only did he remember my name, but then he took a communist newspaper from me, put it in his pocket, and winked at me. Another wild story was that, one of Dennis Kucinich's closest friends was the leader of the Communist Party USA in Cleveland, a guy named Rick Nagin. And Rick Nagin was a Zionist. He was a supporter of Israel. The Communist Party USA officially recognizes Israel. right? And Rick Nagin is a Zionist. Dennis Kucinich is not a Zionist, and he's not pro-Israel. So the Palestine activists, they couldn't meet at Dennis Kucinich's office. They would meet somewhere else because Rick Nagin ran the Dennis Kucinich's office, and he said that anti-Israel Palestine activism is anti-Semitic. So Dennis Kucinich would not go to his own office, but he would meet with the Palestine activists of Cleveland somewhere else. So actually, Dennis Kucinich was more radical than the Communist Party. The Communist Party was pro-Israel. And Dennis Kucinich was not. He was pro-Palestine. So that was pretty wild. So anyway, Dennis Kucinich, he would always run for president, and he would run on a kind of an anti-war, populist kind of left-wing platform. And he never had a chance in hell. They would always defeat him. But they did this to Dennis Kucinich on national TV. It's UFO related. And I will never forget this because it made me very, very angry. This is what happened at one of the debates when Dennis Kucinich, he's one of those candidates where they don't give him a question. They give him like 2 seconds on national TV. They ask the other candidates many questions. They get on TV a lot, but Dennis Kucinich, they pretty much ignored him. But one time they asked him a question, and this is what happened.
Kucinich, I want to move to a different area because this is a serious question. The godmother of your daughter, Shirley MacLaine, writes in her new book that you cited a UFO over her home in Washington State, that you found the encounter extremely moving, that it was a triangular craft, silent and hovering, that if you felt a connection to your heart and heard directions in your mind. Now, did you see a UFO?
I did, and the rest of the account, it was unidentified flying object, okay? It's unidentified. I saw something. Now, to answer your question, I'm moving and I'm also going to move my campaign office to Roswell, New Mexico, and another one in Exeter, New Hampshire, okay? And also, you have to keep in mind that Jimmy Carter saw a UFO, and also that more people in this country have seen UFOs and I think approve of George Bush's presidency.
Actually,
and so wait, we're just getting started here.
No. I mean, we have about 14% of Americans say they have seen UFOs. I'm going to move.
What was the percentage?
14%.
What was that percentage?
14.
Yeah. So they just hit Dennis Kucinich with that just to humiliate him. And it was just like, of all the things to ask him about on TV, the fact that his ex-wife, who he's divorced from, claims in a book that she wrote that he and her saw a UFO together. I mean, of all the questions to ask him, that was pretty clear. It's just what they did, same as what they did to Tulsi Gabbard, the same as what they do. I mean, it's the MSNBC, someone called it MSDNC. And they're exactly right? And they just hit him with this UFO issue. And it's like, and he said, well, look, he said, I didn't know what it was. And, it just shows you how biased media can be. But here's the icing on the cake. And this is where it gets great. So you remember Barack Obama took office. Barack Obama got elected. And Barack Obama, it was this new Bush, the Bush years were over and Obama was elected and he was going to restart America's relations. About 2 years into the Obama presidency, the U.S. media hit us with this piece of crap. This piece of crap hit American media. And it was everywhere. This was everywhere. It was on The Daily Show. This was on CNN. This was on MSNBC. This was on Fox. You could not escape this. I didn't even watch much TV at the time, and I knew about this. U.S. media, 2011, around the same time Occupy Wall Street happened, 2011, U.S. media just decided they had to unload this piece of crap on us. And I found a version of it we can show.
Now at 9, a new book is generating a ton of talk this morning. It says that was no UFO that crashed into Roswell, New Mexico back in 1947. Instead, the book claims it was a Soviet spy plane that came down in a storm, and it was filled with genetically engineered child-sized pilots. The book, Area 51, claims Joseph Stalin was hoping the crash would set off a widespread panic in America. He apparently got the idea from Orson Welles' radio broadcast War of the Worlds. Now at 9, what do you think about this book's
theory.
You know, I was right. I have to go back to what you said. I was right in there with the theory till we got to the child-sized pilot aliens.
Right, exactly.
And then everything kind of gets a little fishy.
Yeah, it's one of those things, though. I mean, both theories are so...
Anyway, yes. In 2011, there was a huge public media blitz informing us that there's this new book that's been written, that shows that the UFOs were actually from Stalin. And it was so unbelievably stupid, but it was all over US media that the UFOs actually came from Stalin. And this woman named Annie Jacobson, I'm going to pull up her, Annie Jacobson is the writer, right? And that she wrote this book, Area 51, An Uncensored History of America. And they, like all the mainstream media, I am convinced this book, this was like some CIA, this is some kind of psyop, because this book was everywhere. You could not escape this. It was just all over American media. And the story was, and I'll just read you, this is what Wikipedia, their summary of the book. The book, based on interviews with scientists and engineers who worked at Area 51, addresses the Roswell UFO incident and dismisses the alien story. Instead, it suggests that Joseph Mengele, the Nazi, the evil Nazi, experimenter, was recruited by Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. What? That Stalin recruited Joseph Mengele. What? To produce grotesque, child-sized aviators to be remotely piloted and landed in America to cause hysteria in the likeness of Orson Welles' 1938 radio drama, The War of the Worlds. Yes. So what happened was one day evil Stalin was sitting in the Kremlin, and he was sitting there going, "Mwahaha, mwahaha, how can I make the Americans panic? Mwahaha. Well, I know in 1938 there was a radio show in America called War of the Worlds, and America panicked because they thought aliens were coming. So I shall take a bunch of midgets, and I shall put them in a flying saucer, yes? And I shall fly it into America. And Americans will panic because they will see that it is actually real." It is the dumbest theory I have ever heard. And this was all over mainstream media. All over mainstream media, they informed us that Area 51, there's this new book. I mean, and it couldn't possibly be wrong. That it says that actually, the little green men were midgets that were genetically engineered by Nazi scientist Joseph Mengele, who was recruited by Stalin and flown into the United States and painted green to look like little green men from the War of the Worlds. And it was all a conspiracy by Stalin. UFOs are all a big conspiracy by Stalin. That's what we were told. And the US media, they just rolled this out there, and it was just like everywhere. It's like, haven't you heard, this? And it was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard. I sat there, and it was just like, seriously? Like, is this for real? Like they're really trying to tell us this? Like that, and there's a lot of people who looked into this book and said this book is crap, right? Space historian Dwayne Day called Area 51 a poorly researched, poorly sourced, error-filled book that makes arguments that defy common sense and is reliant on only one anonymous source. Yeah, it's one anonymous source. And if you look at the author, Annie Jacobson, right? What does Annie Jacobson do? Well, she's a Pulitzer Prize finalist, right? And she produces television, Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan for Amazon Studios, and Clarice for CBS News. And, she's written for the New York Times, and she was a contributing editor to the Los Angeles Times. And, she wrote a 2014 book called Operation Paperclip, the secret intelligence program that brought Nazis to America. And I wonder who would have given her declassified information for that. Oh, she wrote another one, The Pentagon's Brain, an uncensored history of DARPA, America's top secret military research agency. Yeah. It seems pretty clear that for whatever reason, it looks like it was some kind of intelligence psyop. Annie Jacobson got assigned to tell America that UFOs actually were midgets, midgets that were genetically engineered by Stalin, who was working with Nazis. I mean, this is like, it's the dumbest thing. Yeah. She's got friends on the inside, as they say, and they assigned her to write this piece of crap book, and they made sure this piece of crap book was everywhere. You could not open a newspaper or turn on the TV for like 2 weeks without hearing Annie Jacobson explaining that, that Stalin flew midgets to cause panic into America. It's unbelievable. Now, I guess I'll just end these opening remarks by saying that, Trump, the Trump administration, there were a lot of like press releases about UFOs and stuff like that. And then again, as I started out saying, UFOs are just a part of American culture, right? It's just a part of American culture. Do we know what actually happened at, what was this flying disc? Was it actually a weather balloon like they say? I don't know. I have no idea. And, I have no idea, but I have a feeling that, because of Hollywood, because of American movies, because of all of that, we're going to be hearing about UFOs for quite some time. It's just going to be a recurring theme in U.S. culture. I think that the 1947 incident sparked a reaction, and that was rooted in kind of the trauma of U.S. society and then later. But it also seems pretty clear that when the ruling class are fighting with each other, that's when we start hearing about UFOs again. Right? In the 80s, we're all friends after 6, Ronald Reagan. We weren't hearing about him then. And that when the ruling class are fighting with each other, all of a sudden we start hearing about UFOs. And I'm not sure what that means, right? And if there's obviously a lot of classified government information, and obviously, Trump was pushing the conspiracy button quite a bit. There you go. Annie Jacobson. What's JRE? But it's obvious that, there are threats to declassify things that would be, embarrassing to government officials and embarrassing to rival factions of the ruling class. And, there's internal fights among the ruling class. And so, it could be some coded messaging going on, right? We don't really know. And we're never really going to know. But at the end of the day, we're never really going to know. But I think we're going to be hearing a lot about UFOs. And it's important to pay attention to how these things that are in U.S. culture, how they evolve and adapt over time, and how people's attitudes toward them change over time. It's Joe Rogan Experience. Got it. So I just wanted to share that with all of you. So there you go. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. That's hilarious. Hit the notifications bell, and let's start talking about names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? Names and locations. I'll start calling you out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us? Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. All right. Names and locations. All right. We got Lawrence Johnson in Chicago, Cleveland Pirate Alex, Ryan in Oakland. Check out the California United Front. They had a great web conference earlier today. Jim in Harrisburg, Charles in UK. There we go. There we go. John McCarthy in Chicago, David Fox in Sydney, catching up with comrades. Very good. Synthetic Leftist College is where Gavin is. Gabby Hernandez is in Chicago. Heidi in Edinburgh, Scotland. Minas, Brazil. We got someone in Ireland. Raleigh, North Carolina, Phuket, Thailand, Newton, New Jersey, Tyler in Missouri, Nate in Chicago, Gary and Jerry in Thunder Bay. We got Walter in Montana. He's watching on Facebook. We are on Facebook. UP of Michigan. We got Deb in Mexico. We got Bob Troy in New York. Walter Morris in Montana. Burns in Alabama. Kieran from San Diego. Simon from Missouri is with us. Very, very good. We got Che Guevara in New Mexico. Maple in Chapel Hill. Very good. Micah in Las Vegas is with us. Very, very good. Very, very good. Good stuff. Very good stuff. Names and locations, folks. I will call you out as I see you. Good to let you got Yada Yisrael is with us. Carolyn and Dario from Brooklyn. They're with us as well. Good stuff. Good stuff. Alex from Brazil. Andre in Sao Paulo. Ottawa, Canada. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Yonatan Mahari from London, the United Kingdom. Alex from Brazil. Very, very good. Very, very good. Hello, Sam Johnson, says Parasocialite. Very, very good. We got Dunn, North Carolina. Donnie Wallace from Dunn, North Carolina. Very, very, very good. Very, 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 very good. We got Neil Fraser in Hong Kong. Glad to have you, Neil. Or Niall. I think it's Niall. Neil or Niall. Got Mark from Mission, Texas. Glad to have you. We got Meredith and Quinn from Washington State. Meredith and Quinn, good folks. Nancy Pelosi in deep space. Very good. Very, very good. Very, very good. Very, very good. We got Megan in Kansas City. Welcome, Megan. We got Zephyr in Eugene, Oregon. Welcome, Zephyr. We got Jerry Teller in Texas. We got Noah and Crizzy in Clavis, California. Good stuff, folks. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, so now I'm going to start answering your super chat questions. So if you have something you want me to talk about, send me a super chat. I'm always happy to answer your super chats. Always happy to answer your super chats. So by all means, the first super chat question is, who is Ted Kaczynski? Ted Kaczynski is a convicted murderer. He is also known by his nom de guerre, the Unabomber. He was somebody, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he was a very intelligent person. He tested very high on his intelligence tests. And so he was kind of, as a high school student, he was put into some kind of Harvard, or was it Harvard or Yale or one of those Ivy League schools? He was put into their intelligence program. And then they subjected him to psychological abuse as part of like some MK Ultra style experiments. They had a lawyer verbally abuse him. They like strapped him to a chair and verbally abused him. And that did a huge amount of psychological damage to him. Then he was just kind of a weird person. And got a cabin in the woods and started sending people bombs in the mail. And he wrote a manifesto. And one of his demands was that, in order to stop his bombings, he wanted his manifesto published in the New York Times. And so they published his manifesto in the New York Times. And his brother recognized the manifesto and turned him in. And now he's in federal prison. And there's a lot of like weird anarchists who really like him because he's very, very anti-technology. He's like one of those anarcho-primitivists. He wants us to go back to a time before technology. I generally have a very low opinion of people that are against technological progress. I believe in technological progress. He's basically a Luddite. I believe he targeted industrial development, industrialists. He was some kind of like weird environmentalist or something like that. I will say, though, that I did find the section of his manifesto that was about leftism to be hilarious. I saw it, John. Very good. And thank you. I did find the manifesto that he wrote, and we'll talk about that too. All right. John, all right. I did find the section of his manifesto to be about leftists to be really funny. He talks basically about political correctness and how like being a leftist no longer means you're a socialist. It now just kind of means you're a person who likes to follow rules. you know, and he makes some interesting, astute observations about leftists. And I thought that was a good piece. That's his contribution, I would say. Other than that, you know, other than his observation about over socialization and what it means to be a leftist, I didn't really find him to be, writing it down. Good question. Very good. But yeah, I you know, I mean, he's a sociopath and he's anti-human. Killed a lot of people with mail bombs and doesn't believe in technology. But at the same time, you know, his critique of leftists was amusing. And there are a lot of anarchists. It used to be in New York City. Maybe they still do it. But before the pandemic, every year in New York City, there used to be this event that they would have at a church near NYU, right? Near NYU campus, there's a church. And at that church, every year they used to have the Anarchist Book Fair. And if you went to the Anarchist Book Fair at this church, I forget which one, it's like right near NYU, they would have all kinds of different anarchist groups. And one of the things you would always find at the Anarchist Book Fair was you would find people selling Ted Kaczynski's manifesto. Always you would find that. There was always at least one person selling it. And I mean, yeah, kind of sad. But anyway, yeah, Ted Kaczynski, you know, I did find the Saturday Night Live sketches about Ted Kaczynski that feature Will Ferrell to be brilliant. Go watch the Ted Kaczynski Saturday Night Live sketches with Will Ferrell. They're very funny on many different levels. I think it's smarter than most humor is now. Nowadays, you can't make jokes where you expect people to know anything. But if you know anything about Ted Kaczynski's story, the Saturday Night Live skits are particularly good. That's a good question, Tyler. Very good. Very, very good question. All righty. So, next question. Would you support the Second Rainbow Coalition with the new African Black Panther Party? Well, first of all, so the term Rainbow Coalition was invented by Fred Hampton, and it referred to when Fred Hampton, you know, he united the gangs of Chicago, the racial gangs of Chicago. He got the Latin gangs of Chicago and the Chicano gangs of Chicago and the white gangs of Chicago to form kind of a truce, right? And they were united against the police and demanding an end to poverty. And then my understanding is that then Jesse Jackson in the 80s, he started a group that he called the Rainbow Coalition, right? And that was Jesse Jackson when he was becoming kind of the main, you know, left-wing voice. You know, he was the left-wing candidate in the 1980s, 1984 presidential election. He formed a group called the Rainbow Coalition, and that was the name of his group. Rainbow Push, I think it was called. Rainbow Push was the name of Jesse Jackson's organization. And I think it might still be around, Rainbow Push. But I'm not aware of the new African Black Panther Party offering some kind of, you know, coalition or something, but I'd be open to talking with them, you know. Unfortunately, you know, it seems like, I'll just throw this out there. Anyone who's a leftist, you know, the second you start talking to me, immediately all kinds of troll and bot accounts start attacking you on the internet and calling you a neo-Nazi. So, you know, if they're willing to put up with that, if they really want to have an alliance with us, fine. But I've learned, don't chase after people. So, you know, if they want to meet with me and if they want to meet with the Center for Political Innovation about some kind of alliance, I'm open to it. Absolutely. You know, I mean, we are supporters of the Uhuru movement. The Uhuru movement spoke at our last conference. We support them in the face of their attack. I'm going to get to John's super chat about it later on the stream. You know, I want to support all Black nationalism. I'm quoted frequently in the Final Call newspaper of the Nation of Islam. I support all Black nationalism. That said, I don't know anybody from the new African Black Panther Party. So I don't know if they're willing to withstand the fact that they would immediately be called, you know, they would immediately be accused of being, you know, anti-Semitic and white supremacist. You know, there is a vicious government hate campaign against the Center for Political Innovation. I mean, There is. And trust me, there is. And anyone who's been around us long enough knows that if you're around us long enough, and inevitably people come to you and they like bombard you, and you start getting people harassing you and saying that you're a Nazi and all this. We're not Nazis. We don't believe in fascism here. We don't believe in anti-Semitism here or any form of bigotry. But there is a government-directed campaign against us. I'm on the Ukrainian government's official list of information terrorists. I'm on their list as they call me. I'm on the list. Like, I'm literally on the list. So, you know, anyone who's a leftists for whatever reason, people that call themselves socialists and communists, people who buy into the woke thing, they don't have any courage at all. They are the most emotionally weak people. And so communist groups generally, you know, they don't have any courage. And for some reason in their minds, they have this belief, well, we should attach ourselves to wokeness. I don't know why. Why? You know what I mean? They don't have the courage to actually break with wokeness. And so the second they start talking to us, immediately they get an inflow of messages about how I'm a Nazi because I met with Dugin and blah, 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 and the cult and blah, 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 blah. And people that think they're leftists and have ties to existing communist groups don't have any courage and generally just, you know, collapse in the face of that. And then we won't associate with them. Then won't associate with us. But if this new African Black Panther Party wants to work with us, and they have the strength to withstand that, which will inevitably happen, I'd be happy to work with them. But, you know, I've learned, you know, look, you want to work with me, work with me. You don't want to work with me, don't work with me. But I'm not pandering to anybody. And I'm not chasing after anybody. I'm not going to do it. Not going to do it, right? If you want to work with us, work with us. If you don't want to work with us, don't. But I am done. I am done pandering. I'm done, you know, I'm done begging people. You know, I'm not going to do that. So, you know, if the new African Black Panther Party wants to work with us, I'm down. But if they don't, then they don't. I mean, it's just that simple, right? And I don't pander. I am done pandering. I'm done, trying to convince people. And if these people, if this organization, if their response when they inevitably get attacked and called Nazi collaborators for talking to me, if their response is going to be, then it's not a good idea, right? I'm just telling you that, right? And that a lot of people don't realize this is the sad thing, right? Is that there's a lot of really, really good people who become communists, right? And they believe in communism, and they read Marx and they read Lenin, and so then they go and join the Communist Party USA. They go and join the PSL. They go and join Socialist Alternative. They go and join, whatever. And a lot of them listen to these streams and like what I have to say, and they join their local communist group. And it makes sense to them, right? This group is talking about socialism. Caleb talks about socialism. Caleb's obviously not a racist. Caleb's obviously not a white supremacist. But then they go join their local communist group, and they say, they're telling them at the first meeting, how did you get interested in communism? Well, I read Marx and Lenin, and then I've been listening to this Caleb Maupin guy. And then the person in the room goes, what? You aren't allowed to listen to him. Caleb is and the person goes, are you sure? Because I've listened to his streams a lot. I don't think he's an advocate of white supremacism. No, it's one of the first things we know in this group is that Caleb is blah, 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 blah. And they're just like, I don't think he is. And it's like, well, if you're going to be in this group, you can't listen to Caleb because Caleb is blah, 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 blah. And they're like, okay, I won't do that. And I get emails from people like this all the time. I get emails like this all the time. I get emails from people like this all the time. And, it's like, hey, I really like you, but I'm in the PSL. I really like you, but I'm in the CPUSA. I really like you, but I'm in this group. And it's like, you're welcome to be here and watch. I'm not going to, kick you out or tell you you can't watch. And in fact, we even allow dual membership in the Center for Political Innovation. We're not a party. You can be a member of the Communist Party or the Socialist Workers Party or the PSL or any group and be a member of the Center for Political Innovation. We have no restrictions. All it takes to be a member of the Center for Political Innovation is to sign up on the website. If you sign up on the website, you can be a member of the Center for Political Innovation. That's all it takes. And if you want to be involved in our activities and help us carry it out, we have no criteria. You don't have to. You can be a member of other groups and be a member of the Center for Political Innovation and help us do our work. And we'd be happy to have you. However, it seems like every communist group in the world has got it in their head that Caleb is no good. The CPI are no good. They're bad. I read this article that was once quoted by somebody that says that they're a bunch of white supremacist and it's like, you know, if you listen to us, we're clearly not white supremacists. We're clearly not neo-Nazis. We clearly are not, you know, we're not a cult. We're not, you know, and the lies they make about us are so over the top and ridiculous. So over the top and ridiculous. You know, I mean, again, white supremacism? Seriously? That's what you think we're broadcasting on these streams when we talk about how much we love Farrakhan and how much we love Gaddafi and how much we love Malcolm X and William L. Patterson and Henry Winston. We're always talking about the heroic efforts of the Communist Party to fight racism. You think we're advocating white supremacism on these streams? Like, if you listen to us for 2 seconds, you know that's not true. You know, that we're, you know, the lies that they tell are so ridiculous. You know, just today, I'll mention this, right? It's worth mentioning, right? I don't know if you saw this on my Twitter. I'll pull up my Twitter here. So somebody in Germany, I think, was it Germany or Holland or something like that? Somebody in some non-English speaking country posted a picture of our edition of the Green Book, right? And this is what they tweeted out. I pushed translate tweet. This is what they tweeted out. For those who see my Goodreads update and wonder why I'm reading the Caleb Maupin version, I'm sorry. It was a gift from someone, and it's the only edition of the Green Book that I have. But I skipped his intro, and I went straight to chapter 1. So, like, you know, she has to make sure everyone knows that she does have the Caleb Maupin version of the Green Book. But she didn't read my introduction. She skipped it. And so I tweeted at her. I said, good thing she skipped the introduction. If you read anything that I have ever written, my magical Nazbol brainwashing powers seep into your mind, and you immediately become part of my fascist conspiracy. She dodged a bullet. Smart move. So ridiculous. I'm supposed to be a cult leader, right? But in the Center for Political Innovation, if you buy a book by Marx and it has an introduction by somebody that I don't agree with, you're allowed to read that introduction. You don't have to get on social media and say, guys, just make sure, you know, I didn't read the introduction. I know Caleb's no good, so I would never read anything that Caleb wrote. So just so you know, I mean, I read the Green Book, but I did not read the Caleb part. I did not read. I mean, who's in a cult? Who's in a cult? Who's brainwashed? You're allowed to read things by people that we disagree with. And any CPI member can attest to this. In the CPI, we have no problem with you reading whatever you want. But whatever group this woman's in, the synthetic left of Twitter is much more of a cult than we are, because this woman had to get on there and make sure the whole world knew that even though she had a book where I wrote the introduction, she did not read the introduction. She did not read the Caleb. She only read the Gaddafi parts. She didn't read the Caleb parts. So don't worry. You know, please don't persecute her. Yeah. Who's in a cult? Who's in a cult? Who's brainwashed? Who's afraid of thinking? Who's engaging in thought stopping? Who's practicing mind control? You asked me, am I willing to work with the New African Black Panther Party? We'll work with anybody. Anybody. If the New African Black Panther Party wanted to cooperate with us, send people to our events, have speakers, have dialogue, we'd love that. But I'm just telling you, I have a feeling that the second that, they started talking to us, immediately they would get hit with all the cyberbullying and all the smear operation that comes straight from a government office, by the way. It comes straight from a government office. It's way too well coordinated. Go on Reddit, right? And go to like a cooking. There'll be like the cooking section of Reddit, and go and push like a link to this stream And wait, see how quickly, immediately, right below that, they will have a bunch of people saying, yeah, just so you know, this guy who you posted here is actually a white supremacist. He wants to kill all Jews. He's tied in with Alexander. It is, there are offices, there are troll farms that are assigned to harass and cause problems for me and anyone who associates with me. And I know that sounds paranoid. I know that sounds self-important, but I'm just telling you, I am on the Ukrainian government's, information terrorist list. I'm a reporter for RT. And that there is a division of the American government that is, the American government or some nonprofit or NATO or NAFO or whatever it is, that is determined to do everything they can to try and make me untouchable, try and make me toxic, try and make people afraid to talk to me and associate with me. And it hasn't worked. There's plenty of people who like me, and there's plenty of people, who are very friendly to me. So, they try a new angle every day, right? First, they try to laugh at me. I'm stupid. Oh, you stupid. They try that. That doesn't work. I'm a white supremacist. I'm a neo-Nazi. I'm a cult leader. I'm involved. I'm this. All of this is just a maniacal scheme to get sexual favors out of all of you. Did you know that? The only reason I do politics is I'm trying to suck people in so I can do sexual things with them. That's the latest memo that's been sent out. Did you know that? I don't actually believe anything I'm saying. All these books behind me, they're just for show, right? This is all just an elaborate scheme for me to get sexual favors out of people. That's the latest one, right? I mean, Vosh said it. It must be true. He's got 100,000 views, right? So there you go. So I mean, again, I will work with anybody, but if people don't have a thick skin, people don't have courage, it's not going to work out. All right. I'm the real deal. I'm the real deal. I am the red menace that keeps them awake at night. I am serious about stuff, and I will make real alliances and real compromises. I have ties to real socialist countries. I am solidly anti-imperialist. I'm not a bread tuber. I'm not a larper. I've been doing this since I was 18, and I haven't stopped, and I'm 35, and there you go. So yes, I am the real deal. I am the red menace that keeps them awake at night. They are determined to make sure no one associates with me. There's a reason. There's a reason that they do that. So there you go. Like I said, Caleb eats babies. Caleb eats babies. All right. Someone asked me about the X-Files. What are my favorite, not killing myself until I... Okay. The X-Files, my favorite episode of the X-Files. I was a kid in the 90s, and I was too young for the X-Files when it was on the air. I think I read a couple of the novels of the X-Files when I was a kid, but I never there was the kids young adult novels based on the show. And I don't know. I think I saw a couple of the movies, when they made an X-Files movie. I think I saw a couple of the movies, but I don't really. There was one episode of the X-Files that I watched that was really depressing. It was a Christmas themed episode where it's there's some couple that committed suicide, and then the ghosts are trying to get couples to kill themselves or something. And it's just not my cup of tea. It's not my cup of tea. I just never really got into the X-Files. Wasn't my cup of tea. So there you go. Pushback from the far right to extract concessions from McCarthy. All right. Now, Gavin wants me to open the website alienresistance.org. Well, I'm going to open it. I'm not going to share a screen, Gavin, because I don't share a screen on here, but I'll open it. I'll look at what I see. You super chatted for me to look at alienresistance.org. So I'm pulling it open, alienresistance.org. I really hope it says service unavailable. That's what it says. I'm going to Google alien resistance just to see what it is, because I have no idea. Alien resistance. What is it? I'm seeing books, novels, service unavailable. I'll Google alienresistance.org. Like, what is it? Alienresistance.org, Alien Resistance Headquarters, UFOs, and the Bible. Oh, I must have had the wrong website. Resistance is Fertile, About Us, Statement of Faith. Guy Malone is best known known as Come Sail Away, UFO Phenomenon and the Bible, dedicated to offering a biblical perspective on UFOs and abduction phenomenon and helping people experiencing attacks from tormenting spirits to bring the torment to an end. Guy began his work in the field of UFOlogy with a 1997 publication, Come Sail Away. All right, so there you go. There are different interpretations of the UFO phenomenon. As I said, that would be an evangelical Christian fundamentalist one. There we go. Thank you for sharing that with us, Gavin. And I guess the next super chat is also from Gavin. Gavin said, UFOs and extraterrestrials are consistently anti-Christian. Demons, what are your thoughts? You know, I think that makes sense because who believes in UFOs, right? It tends to be like a new age crowd, people that are into like the hippie stuff, the new age, the Wicca, the occult stuff. And they are not satisfied by mainstream Christianity. That would make sense, right? Again, it was Jimmy Carter, who was a liberal president, Farrakhan, Nation of Islam. It tends to be, your typical Bible-believing Christian fundamentalist is not going to be interested in UFOs, right? The people who are going to be interested in UFOs are going to be, people that are into the paranormal, ghosts, and and people that are into the new age, occultism and stuff. Gavin says UFOs are anti-communist too, not just Christian. Well, of course, because communists, believe in science and such, and UFOs are this magical force from another planet. That's a whole thing. That's a whole milieu. And honestly, I don't know enough about it. I really don't know enough about it. I read a biography of William Dudley Pelley, who was the leader of the Silver Legion of America. He was a fascist in the United States. William Dudley Pelley. And that opened a door for me because I had no idea about this wing of politics, and that occultism is just something, see, when I was a kid, let me just explain my background here. When I was a kid, my family, we were mainline Protestants, and most of the people in our town were evangelicals, conservative Mennonites, very religious folks. My dad was a biologist, really loved Charles Darwin and the theory of evolution. And he was really into the whole debunking thing, right? He liked The Amazing Randy, and he liked, the debunking stuff, the stuff that debunks, paranormal and stuff like that. So, when I was a kid, I knew all the evangelicals and the conservatives that I was around, and I knew my dad, and my dad is a skeptic. He's a skeptic, one of these people that's skeptical of all these things. And I knew all the evangelicals that I was around, right? And so I assumed that those were the two options. There was be an evangelical Christian or be a skeptic. I mean, my dad, it's kind of like the politics of what eventually became new atheism. I don't think my dad would call himself an atheist, but what the new atheist movement, right? Sam Harris, it's this skepticism, right? It's really into science, etc. So I assumed that those were the two options. Then when I went to college, I learned I was wrong. When I was in college, I learned that among people that are not evangelicals, there is a huge amount of belief in ghosts, a huge amount of belief in, reincarnation, paranormal kind of beliefs are very widespread among people that are not people who wouldn't consider themselves to be religious. And that was just something I didn't know, because in my town, we couldn't have Harry Potter in the school library because everyone thought it was witchcraft and satanic, right? And we couldn't even call it Halloween. We had to call it the Autumn Festival because Halloween was satanic. And so, but when I went to college, one thing I learned for Catholic girls that grew up, women that grew up in the Catholic Church, it was almost a rite of passage. They had to go through a Wicca phase, a Wiccan witchcraft phase when they were a teenager. And every girl I'd ever met who had had grown up Catholic. When she was 13 or 14, she went through a phase where she was going to Barnes and Noble and buying books about Wicca and witchcraft, and it was just a part of being a teenage Catholic, right? Is that they had to go through this phase. Well, in my town, people didn't have phases like that because, oh my God, witchcraft. I mean, no one had a phase like that in my town, or else, all hell would break loose. But, but that was, in Cleveland. I went to college in the suburbs of Cleveland, and yeah, almost every girl I met who was from a Catholic background, she went through a Wicca phase. And that's because the Catholic Church has a lot of, patriarchal practices. Only men can be priests, against abortion, against birth control. And that it's very, so Catholic teenage girls tend to go through like a feminist Wicca phase. I didn't know that, right? There were other things like that, beliefs in the paranormal, beliefs in, things that are not rational, things that are not scientific, but are also not Christian. That's very common. People who don't consider themselves religious, a lot of them have belief in paranormal kind of things, UFOs, ghosts, spirits, stuff like that. And that was just a part of life I was not aware of. I thought there were two options: be like my dad, who's a skeptic, or be an evangelical, be a deeply religious person. I thought those were the two options. I was wrong, right? The world is much more complicated than that. And of course, Ouija boards. Who can forget Ouija boards? I don't know much. How does a Ouija board work, right? I don't know exactly how they work. I've seen them on like television. I've never actually seen one. But there you go. There you go. All right. Next super chat question. All right. Have you seen two goth girls interviewed by Bernie Sanders and they reply, "Wait till we get invaded"? No, I have not seen two goth girls interviewed by Bernie Sanders and they reply, "Wait till we get invaded." Haven't seen it. But there you go. Next question. Does the Nation of Islam still believe in Yaqub? Well, I'm not a member of the Nation of Islam. Oh, you'll get me talking there. I'm not a member of the Nation of Islam. I don't represent them, and I mean, I don't share their religious beliefs, and they wouldn't want me to. I mean, they're an explicitly black religious group, so their beliefs are something they wouldn't expect me to believe in, right? It's a black religion. It's for black people, and I am not black. I'm a white dude. But I spent a lot of time with the Nation of Islam in Iran. I am frequently quoted in the Final Call newspaper. My understanding of that is that story of Yaqub, right? So for those of you who may not know, Elijah Muhammad and I guess the founder of the Nation of Islam, a guy they call Master Farad, they had a story that was that in ancient Egypt, originally all men were black. And then in ancient Egypt, there was a scientist, and he created the white man, right? A scientist in ancient Egypt created the white man. And then, we later know that Elijah Muhammad died. Elijah Muhammad's son took over the Nation of Islam, and Elijah Muhammad's son converted the Nation of Islam to just being Sunni Muslims. So, of course, they repudiated that. But then, Minister Farrakhan was, kind of forced out of the Nation of Islam. It was no longer called the Nation of Islam. It was called like the Islamic Organization of America or something like that. So then in 1978, Minister Louis Farrakhan, with support from Gaddafi, relaunched what was called the Nation of Islam. And they had Final Call newspaper, and they had Minister Louis Farrakhan, and they called themselves the Nation of Islam. And the other groups, with roots that go back to Elijah Muhammad, most of them don't believe in the teachings of the Nation of Islam anymore. They just believe in like Sunni Islam. But Farrakhan's group continues to believe the legacy of what, Elijah Muhammad taught. Now, what I've heard is that that's the story, that a scientist named Yaqub created the white man. I've heard that story is very important to the Nation of Islam now. It's very important to them, but there is disagreement about whether it is literally true, right? I think that, that apparently Elijah Muhammad at one point said that it was like a parable. And that he said, well, the point of the story is that we can't blame the white man for our oppression and our suffering because we created him in the first place. and that he was trying to tell black people that it was their submission and their submission to the white man that made the white man, right? And so it was like this psychological thing. If we can stop thinking of ourselves as victims of the white man and recognize that our mindset in relation to the white man gives him the power, then we can be free. That's one interpretation. That's like a very loose interpretation. But there are also many people in the Nation of Islam, I think, that literally do believe it. And that they do, like, they've written articles like, I guess every person with blue eyes is descended from one person, right? And a lot of scientists have shown this, that that the genetic mutation that created blue eyes started fairly recently, like 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. Somebody was born with blue eyes. There've never been anyone with blue eyes before. All right. Well, they point to that and they say, see, and the Nation of Islam, they talk about the blue-eyed devil. That's what they call the white man. And they argue that is proof of the Yaqub thing. And I don't know. I honestly do not know. I have no idea. I don't speak for the Nation of Islam. I do know that, a lot of people, there's a very famous poet, a very, very famous poet. I think somewhere I have his book. Yeah. Amiri Baraka. I don't know if you know about Amiri Baraka. Amiri Baraka is a very famous, like, playwright and black nationalist writer. He was originally in the Nation of Islam, and then he became a Maoist communist. And he has this book, 4 Black Revolutionary Plays. One of the plays is a play about Yaqub creating the white man, which is wild, but, Amiri Baraka, he actually has a play here you can read about, and it's a play about a scientist making the white man. And it was performed in the black community, right? This is 4 Black Revolutionary Plays. Amiri Baraka is an interesting figure. Amiri Baraka is he was a communist. He started out as a Muslim, and then he became a communist, a Maoist communist. He actually recorded some like Maoist communist jazz at one point. You can listen to some of his like Maoist communist jazz. He was the poet laureate of New Jersey for a while, and they stripped him of his title because in his poem, he wrote a poem about 9/11 called Somebody Blew Up America, and it had an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory in it and said, why did no Jews die on 9/11? It was repeating the theory that Jews all got an email. So he was stripped of his poet laureate status, but and he died, but he was, Amiri Baraka was this revolutionary black nationalist communist poet. He was from the Maoist tradition. And he had a black cultural center in Newark, New Jersey for many years. And he was a supporter of the Democratic Party. He was kind of like CPUSA, where he'd tell people to vote for the Democrats. Amiri Baraka. And Amiri Baraka, he did a play about Yaqub and all of that. One of the plays, I remember when I read this 4 Black Revolutionary Plays by Amiri Baraka. I read this when I was in college, one of the plays I remember, if I remember correctly, it's very kind of right-wing and black nationalist. It's like there's 2 gay men that are Jewish, and they're like talking about how they sell heroin in the black community. And they sell heroin, and they give heroin out in the black community, and they're gay and they're Jewish. And then the play ends with a bunch of like African warriors coming onto the stage and cutting their heads off. It's pretty wild. There's another play that he wrote, and it was about like a black man is being arrested, and he's being interrogated by the police. And they're saying that, like, we know you're a revolutionary. And he's like, no, I'm not. I'm just a good conforming black man. I work at the post office. I'm not a revolutionary. They're like, no, you are a revolutionary. And they're like interrogating him. And he's just insisting he's not a revolutionary. And they say, no, we know who you're working for. You're working for him. And then they show like Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King. And the point is that this guy, even though he's not a revolutionary, by being black, the white police associate him with black nationalism and revolution, and he's being persecuted. I generally have enjoyed Amiri Baraka's stuff. I generally have. So there you go. All right. What do you think about psychiatry in the USSR and socialist countries? The history of psychiatry in general. General. There we go. All righty. Okay. Someone says government revealed that they have an aircraft that's not made on this planet. Is that true? I'd like to see that. I mean, if that's true, I'm curious. That sounds like some kind of conspiracy thing, but if that's true, I'd be curious in reading about that. And again, I feel like a lot of this UFO stuff is kind of a psyop, right? That they release things, Jimmy Carter saying he believed in UFOs, that was to get votes, and they do weird stuff. Trump pushed the UFO button a number of times for political reasons, I am convinced. So there you go. All right. Why did the Department of Defense, again, another UFO question, why did the Department of Defense declassify some UFO footage? Again, I am convinced that there's a lot of government stuff that goes on that we're not aware of. And the reason it's classified is because it would embarrass one section of the ruling class. It would embarrass somebody. And that when they declassify stuff, it's like a dig at somebody. Like it's like a threat at a rival wing of the capitalist class, at a rival section of the American deep state. There's a lot of that goes on, where one section of the deep state is threatening or taunting another section. There's a lot of that. I am convinced that a lot of the things that we see in the news that don't make any sense are actually, it's like a coded threat or a coded communication from one section of the deep state and the security services to the other. The CIA is threatening the FBI is threatening the CIA, one wing of the FBI is threatening another wing of the FBI, one wing of the CIA is threatening another wing of the CIA. I'm convinced, because there's a lot of things that happen in American media that don't make any sense. I was talking to somebody when I was in Iran. There's a lot of people who go to these conferences in Iran, that I would go to. A lot of, people that have worked in government, and, people that are now conspiracy writers and stuff. We were talking in Iran, and I talked about how the Spartacist League, I was talking to this one guy in Iran, and I talked about how the Spartacist League in the United States, during the 1980s, there was this communist group called the Spartacist League, and they would show up at every protest, no matter what it was about. They would show up with a huge banner that said, "Hail the Red Army in Afghanistan." Right? And it annoyed people. People thought it was very annoying. Like, there was a big protest in support of abortion in Cleveland, a women's rights, pro-abortion demonstration. The Spartacist League showed up, and they had this huge banner, "Hail the Red Army in Afghanistan." All the people there were really mad. Like, it has nothing to do with abortion. Why do you have this huge banner? And I was talking to some of the people that went to these conferences in Iran with me. And, it was a guy from Europe. And he said, "Caleb, that's intelligence." And I said, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, that's for a reason. Like, that's one intelligence agency doing that." And he said his feeling was, why would they do such a thing? Why is there some weird communist group that's showing up at every rally and unfurling a banner that says, "Hail the Red Army in Afghanistan"? And he said to me, "Caleb," he said, what's probably going on there is a couple things. Like, either on the one hand, this is like an intelligence agency that wants to alert the American government about the danger of communists and the communist influence in the United States. So they're unfurling this banner to try and they're going to all kinds of protests and unfurling this banner to try and make the American FBI and make the CIA more interested in fighting the Soviet Union. Because look, there's people supporting the Soviet Union in Afghanistan at rallies. There's that. Or they said this is somebody who doesn't agree with the left wing. This is like the right wing trying to discredit the socialists. He says, but when somebody does something that weird, it's a signal to somebody. It's not just, and that there's a lot of that you see in American political spaces. There's not that many people that are politically active. There's a lot of people who think about politics, maybe watch streams, read books, but the number of people that actually become political, go to rallies. Okay, I don't know what that means, but the number of people that are political and go to rallies and become politically active is very small, right? Very few people actually engage in political activism. And a lot of times the political activist groups are heavily infiltrated by the government, and they are manipulated to do things that serve one wing of the government against another. And that happens a lot. And that this person was saying that Hail the Red Army in Afghanistan stuff from the Spartacist League, they were infiltrated and somebody was sending a message to somebody, right? There was one group of people, sending a message to somebody else. right? And that there's a lot of that goes on. A lot of these groups are very heavily infiltrated. They do things that don't make sense, and they're doing it because somebody who's pulling their strings, it serves a purpose for them, even though it doesn't serve a purpose. I could think of some examples that I observed, and I'm not even going to go there on this stream because what's the point? But, there are weird things that happen that political groups do. And you look at this political group and you say, why in the world, these fringe political organizations, fringe religious organizations, why are they doing this? It does not make any sense. Like, what purpose does this serve? Well, if it doesn't make sense to you, it's not a message directed at you. It's directed at somebody. Somebody is supposed to see that and go and get the message, right? And that often, the rich and powerful will threaten each other, and, the rich and powerful, one faction will fight another faction. And a lot of times stuff that you observe, like fringe political people, communists, anarchists, Nazis, fascists, fanatical religious organizations, fringe elements in U.S. society, a lot of times they will do things that don't make sense and that even their members won't understand why they're doing. And it's about something bigger. It's serving a bigger purpose. And, and that's something that it took me a long time to realize. And it sounds conspiratorial, but it's true, right? And that, if you look at some of these crazy political groups, it's like, what in the world are they talking about? Well, it means something to somebody. And if you don't know what it means, it's not directed at you. They're communicating with somebody. That's to send a message to somebody, and it's not you. If it doesn't make any sense to you, it's not you. But you're like, I don't know. Some of these groups that would show up, at anti-war rallies, they would have signs like, like there was a guy who used to come to anti-war protests, and he had a sign like, there was a couple people, they would come with signs about Napoleon. Right. I remember this was a big thing during the Bush years. There were all these people who would come to anti-war protests. There, it wasn't very many people, but they always had really big signs comparing Bush to Napoleon. And I always thought that was weird, right? And the signs would say like, greatest tyrants in history, Hitler, Napoleon, Bush. George Bush is a lot like Napoleon. They'd have pictures of Napoleon. And I look back on that now and say, what the hell was that? Right. And it'd be a lot of people that they would get to come to these rallies, and, it wasn't a lot of people, but it was like 10, 15 people that would be at every anti-war protest. And people looked at them like they were crazy. People would ask them, why do you have these signs? And it would be, a picture of Napoleon riding his horse, and it'd say greatest tyrants in history, Bush, Hitler, Napoleon. And you look at that and you think that doesn't make any sense. Like, what in the world are they talking about? Well, that made sense to somebody. Right? Somebody knew something, right? Maybe Bush, really admires Napoleon, and has, a stack of biographies of Napoleon. And he sees that and he goes, oh shit, they know something about me. Maybe there's something going on there. Or maybe that's, there was that rivalry between France and the United States. Remember freedom fries? So maybe that was a message, from French intelligence. Maybe French intelligence was making clear to Bush that they didn't, that they had defeated Napoleon. Napoleon was an embarrassment on French history. And now, right. I mean, I have no idea why did these people show up at all the anti-war rallies with signs that said Bush is like Napoleon? If it was one guy, you'd think, oh, this is a crazy person. But there was obviously a lot of money that was put into having people at these anti-war rallies with signs comparing Bush to Napoleon. What was it? What was going on there? Was that something that meant something? Was like, were people who knew Bush going to look at this and go, oh shit, they know something? Was this, I have no idea what that meant, but it meant something to somebody. When you see something weird coming from political people, it usually is sending it's a message that's meant for somebody for some reason. Right. And if you don't know what it means, if it doesn't make any sense to you, it's not meant for you. It's meant for somebody who knows what it means. And that's an important thing to remember that, it's hard to explain, but I hope that's helpful, right? That a lot of times people that operate in the fringe of politics are sending a message to somebody when they do weird shit, and that stuff that doesn't make sense, it makes sense to somebody. It makes sense to somebody. So there you go. All right, next question. Annie Jacobson advocated for covert regime change operations on the Joe Rogan Experience. Shocker, shocker. That fits everything I said about her in my opening remarks about UFOs. But there you go. There you go. And like I said, I think a lot of this UFO stuff is somebody sending a message to somebody. It means something to somebody, and that, whatever. There you go. Next question. John, the Center for Political Innovation, we fully support the Uhuru movement. We don't have their political line. We have a different perspective, but the government targeting them, accusing them of being Russian agents is completely unacceptable, and we support them. And so I know on Martin Luther King Day, there's going to be a series of protests around the country in support of the Uhuru movement. And so John McCarthy is a member of the Center for Political Innovation based in Chicago, and he's working on a statement, a leaflet, that will be distributed supporting the Uhuru movement. And we need to do everything we can to support them. I'm glad that he's working on it. I'm hoping to edit this statement. And there we go. There we go. How has the Russo-Ukraine conflict shaped geopolitics in Europe, especially in relation to the international communist movement? Well, I mean, in general, it has made the differences between the European mainland and the Atlanticist powers, America and Britain, much more acute. There has always been a long-standing rivalry between the European mainland and Britain and America. Britain and America want to control the European mainland and align with it against Russia, and the European mainland doesn't generally appreciate having its arm twisted. And these differences manifest themselves in many different ways. Probably the biggest example of this difference is nuclear power. France is one of the biggest supporters of nuclear power that there is, right? The French nuclear power, the government in France has invested in nuclear power. The French nuclear power program was started by a communist nuclear physicist. France loves nuclear power. But Britain and America, that's oil. They're all about oil. They're in the oil business. They control the international oil markets. And the four super major oil companies, BP, Chevron, Shell Oil, and ExxonMobil, they don't like nuclear power because it'll put them out of business. So there is a rivalry over nuclear power to the point that, like, France has killed Greenpeace activists. There are Greenpeace activists that were killed by the French government. And Israel, big puppet of the United States, has murdered French citizens. They bombed Iraq in the 1980s, blew up the Iraqi nuclear power plant facility, and killed a French nuclear scientist who was working there. There's a long-standing rivalry. The European mainland loves nuclear power, and France loves nuclear power. Germany loves nuclear power. They've been forced to give it up, but Germany historically loves nuclear power. Britain and America don't. And there's many examples of this, and the struggle by Britain and America to control the European mainland and use the European mainland as a battering ram against Russia. That is one of the main geopolitical sources of intrigue. And if you look at all the protests happening all over the European mainland, they are pissed about not having heat. They are pissed about the cost of food. They are not thrilled with the escalation of this tension with Russia. And every so often, Macron or the Germans kind of hint that beneath the surface, they don't like this. They're pretending to go along with it, whatever, and these, but beneath the surface, the French people, the German people, even, folks in Denmark and Sweden, and they don't like it. And of course, the main vocal source of opposition to the escalation with Russia is, of course, the New Right. They are the main voice of opposition. Okay. But there are leftists too that are joining these protests. There are leftists. So there you go. Now, in relation to the international communist movement, how has it reshaped it? The Greek Communist Party has been a huge disappointment. The Communist Party of Greece is one of the biggest communist parties in Europe. They've remained powerful, and they have taken anti-revisionist positions. They're pro-Stalin. They generally have taken solid positions. In response to the developments over the last couple of years, they have completely fallen on their faces. The Greek Communist Party is now talking about Russian and Chinese imperialism versus U.S. imperialism and NATO imperialism, and they are neutral. And that is not an acceptable position to take. It's despicable. The Greek Communist Party has really fucked up bad. And because they dominate a lot of the international communist gatherings and, the World Federation of Trade Unions, the International Communist Seminar and stuff like that, or the International Conference of Communist and Workers' Parties, SolidNet or whatever it's called, they have really taken the global communist movement in a bad direction. However, WAP, right? World Anti-Imperialist Platform, 21.org, they represent, and it's with their Paris Declaration, WAP represents the pushing of the communist movement in the right direction. And the Center for Political Innovation, we are signatories. We are going to be listed on the website very soon as signatories of WAP 21, of the Paris Declaration. And that this is it's a regroupment of the global communist movement to support Russia and China and North Korea and make clear that no matter who fires the first shot, in Ukraine, NATO is the aggressor and NATO is to blame. If something happens, U.S. imperialism and its escalation with Taiwan, we got to support China. And if something happens, North Korea's got to be supported on the Korean Peninsula. And that needs to be the position, right? The Western capitalist imperialists are the main danger. And it's not plague on both your houses. It's not an inter-imperialist rivalry. Russia and China and North Korea are anti-imperialist powers that are aligned with the socialist countries, if not socialist themselves. And that needs to be the position. And Jyoti Brar and the CPG-BML has taken a very good position, and we're on board with it. And, that's good. So there you go. World Anti-Imperialist Platform. That's an important development. And that, there is a synthetic left, and that the communist groups of the Western countries, now is the time for the communist groups of the Western countries to just make clear we're not part of the left. We are not part of the synthetic left. We are something different. There's a group of people that are obsessed with the trans issue, that are obsessed with sex, that think they're anti-fascist, and fascist means any form of, people working in groups and organizing. And there's a movement of radical liberalism that is emerging in the West that is very anti-religious, that's very obsessed with sexual stuff, that is very much, very much a defender of the status quo and thinks that the new right opposition is the main danger. We have to break with that. We have to break with it. Period. I mean, we just have to break with it. And now is the time that we just have to make clear the Democratic Party, the breadtube, the mainstream voices that call themselves left, we have nothing to do with them. We're something different. Communists, we're something different. We're something different. While we might agree with these people on opposing racism and not wanting war, they're different than we are. We are an illiberal movement. They are a liberal movement. They are radical liberalism, and we are illiberal. So there has to be a solid break because, look, name one communist party in the world that is in power, running the government, and doesn't support Russia in Ukraine. Name one. Name one communist government that is in power, that's running the government, and doesn't support Russia. There's not one. Laos, the communists support Russia. Vietnam, the communists support Russia. China, communists support Russia. North Korea, communists support Russia. Belarus, the communists support Russia. Nicaragua, the communists support Russia. Venezuela, the communists support Russia. There is not one. Cuba, communists support Russia. There is not one genuine communist party that is in power that doesn't support Russia. So anyone who says to me, "Oh, you're retarded. Oh my God, how can you be a communist and support Russia? You must know nothing." Actually, no, you know nothing. Because every single communist government in the world supports Russia right now. So if you want to go, "Oh, that's retarded. There's income inequality in Russia," you don't know what you're talking about. You do not know what you're talking about. But the reason that you have your arrogance about you and you think you know that is because there's a bullshit fake left in the West that thinks socialism is worker co-ops, right? That thinks overproduction means we have to all be poorer because of Mother Earth, which they don't understand that. That thinks anyone who's not 100% pro-trans is therefore de facto a Nazi. And those people have no idea. And they will say to you, oh my God, how could any communist support Russia? Well, geez, the Communist Party in Russia are the biggest supporters of the intervention. And China, and the communists in China, the communists in Vietnam, the communists in Cuba, the communists in Venezuela, the communists in Nicaragua, all the communists in the world support Russia right now. So, you're completely out of touch with global communism. And you think, oh, I watched a Vosh video, I know what communism is. No, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't. To both sides. Right. It is. And it must be said. I mean, and it must be said. So there you go. There you go. All right. Yeah. What can Marxists learn from Mahatma Gandhi? Well, it's interesting because Gandhi was an anti-communist. And Gandhi actually was sympathetic to Hitler because Hitler was against the British Empire. And he was hoping that India could, get independence from the British. And so he wrote letters to Hitler and said positive things to Hitler. And that's kind of a scar on Gandhi's memory. But what can communists learn from Gandhi? Well, one of the most important things, what was Gandhi arrested for doing? What was his act of civil disobedience against the British? Boiling salt water. And why was it illegal for Gandhi to boil salt water? Why was that an act of civil disobedience? Why? Well, it was an act of civil disobedience because the British had a monopoly on the sale of salt. Because that's what imperialism is. It's about saying you can't produce your own salt, India. You can't boil your own salt. You must import your salt from British salt companies. That's imperialism. And the main way the British Empire kept India poor was by imposing economic strangulation on it, saying you're not allowed to boil salt water and make salt. You have to buy your salt from British corporations, keeping it as a captive market. That's why the Indian people have been weaving for thousands of years, had all their looms burned down, and they had to import all their cloth from the British Empire. That points to the essence of imperialism. People think imperialism is an army invading. People think imperialism is, when people are mean to each other or something. Well, no, imperialism is about economic strangulation. And Gandhi, by boiling that salt water, he was standing up and defying the economic strangulation of India. And that the American Revolution, well, what do you think the Boston Tea Party was? It was the same kind of thing. The colonists were being forced to buy their tea from British corporations. They weren't allowed to set up their own businesses. They just were used as a captive market for the British East India Company. That's what imperialism is all about. That's what imperialism is all about, right? Imperialism is about economic strangulation. So that's something I can take from Gandhi. The other thing is that how did Gandhi first get political was when he was in South Africa. Gandhi lived in South Africa and he saw apartheid, and that got him thinking about what was going on in India. So there's a lot you can learn from Gandhi overall. However, it's important to point out that Gandhi was an anti-communist. Gandhi was willing to work with Nazis historically, and that communists in India and Gandhi didn't get along with each other. Let's just be honest about that. That communists in India and Gandhi in India, they weren't friendly to each other. There was a rivalry between them. So, there's no shame in pointing that out. So, the other thing is that in India, and this is an interesting point of history, India was a colony of the British during World War II, right? It was a colony of the British. The British were aligned with the Soviet Union to defeat the Nazis. So there were a number of communists in India who quit the Communist Party because they wanted to keep fighting the British. And they were called fascist collaborators by the Communist Party. And the Communist Party, worked with the British Empire to suppress them, and there was a rivalry. The communist group in India that's very big now, it's called the Socialist Unity Center of India, Communist. And I actually have one of their books. Their founder was a guy named Shivdas Ghosh. And this is one of the communist groups in India. And it was started by a guy named Shivdas Ghosh. And Shivdas Ghosh, you know, he was a communist in India, this guy, but he didn't want to support the British during World War II. And he wanted to keep fighting for India's independence from Britain. So he formed his own communist group, and he formed like an armed militia that got money from Japan during World War II. And Japan gave Shivdas Ghosh a lot of money to fight the British in India. Right? You know, and he got a lot of support from Japan to fight the British. And so, of course, the Communist Party of India hated him and wanted to murder him. I think they tried to kill him on several occasions, and he tried to kill them. There was like battles between the communists and Shivdas Ghosh's people. So now in India, there's this big communist party in India called the Socialist Unity Center of India, and it's followers of Shivdas Ghosh, and they are Marxist-Leninists, they call themselves. And, you know, these things happen. You know, and honestly, you know, I can understand. And this is one thing I want to get this out, right? And again, there's so much nuance in the world. There is so much nuance in the world, right? There's so much nuance in the world, and that people don't understand nuance. Okay. But like, you know, Hitler, we all recognize was evil. Holocaust, horrendous. Hitler was a mass murderer, launched World War II, committed the Holocaust, awful, awful person. Everybody knows that, okay? Everybody knows that, right? Aside from a few people that are Holocaust deniers, everyone recognizes that Hitler was not a good dude, okay? However, before Hitler was ever born, or maybe, you know, around the time that Hitler was a small child, all over the world, there was something called the British Empire. And the British Empire committed many holocausts. In Ireland, they carried out a man-made famine that led to 15% of the population dying. That was genocide. In India, they committed many famines in India. In India, there were many, many man-made famines where millions of people in India died. So if you're in India, imagine that you're in India and you have seen your fellow Indian people starved and murdered, you know, by the British, and you joined the Communist Party because the Communist Party wants to fight for independence from the British. And then the Communist Party says, well, now we're going to team up with the British to fight this guy Hitler. You can imagine that a lot of people in India would say, well, fuck that. I didn't sign up to fight some German guy. I came here to fight the British. You know, and does that make them Nazis? No, that just means that, you know, and the same thing happened in Syria, right? That's why Ba'athist Arab socialism became a movement, because France was the colonizer of Syria. And a lot of people joined the Syrian Communist Party because they wanted to fight France. And then the Soviet Union, you know, was at war with the Nazis, and they got told that, well, you know, your job is to fight against the, you know, the Germans, and don't fight France. And they said, well, fuck that. I signed up to fight the French. And that we forget this. And that, again, nuance, people, nuance, right? I'm going to mention this, and people are going to say you're saying good things about Hitler. No, I'm not. I'm pointing out contradictions, okay? Hitler gave a lot of money to the IRA during World War II. Did you know that? There were a lot of IRA leaders who were fighting against the British, and they were Roman Catholic, and they liked Hitler, and Hitler liked them, and Hitler gave money to them. There was a leader of Kenya. The African nation of Kenya was colonized by the British. There was this Kenyan guy, from Kenya, and he wanted to fight the British. So he flew to Berlin, and you can see footage of Hitler shaking hands with this black African from Kenya and saying, I support this guy. He's fighting the British, you know? So, you know, history is complicated. And, you know, for a white person in a Western country to say, I love Hitler, that's obviously a white supremacist statement. But do you think that guy in Kenya who was fighting against, yeah, I'm aware. Do you think that guy in Kenya who was fighting against, you know, British colonialism and got flown to Berlin and did a photo op with Hitler. Do you think that guy is an evil Nazi? No, I think he's just a guy who wanted to free the people of Kenya. And he loved the Kenyan people, and he hated the British. And there's this guy in Germany that he's never heard of. He doesn't care about him. This guy in Germany, he's fighting the British too. Okay, I'll sign up, you know? And there's a lot of that went on during World War II, and it confused the global communist movement. And it makes sense. When people are fighting colonialism and people are fighting genocide at the hands of the British Empire, and, you know, people didn't know about the Holocaust. The Holocaust didn't become public knowledge. Thank you, Ari. The Holocaust didn't become public knowledge until after the war. So they didn't even know about the Holocaust, right? So they didn't know about the Holocaust. And here's this guy fighting the, he's fighting the British. So they supported him. And history is much more complicated. I'm glad you understand how important history is. Much more complicated than people make it out to be. And that these things happened. Right. So Gandhi wrote letters to Hitler and praised Hitler and was cheering for Hitler because he was fighting the British, and that these things happen. If you read Native Son, one of the most famous African-American novels, written in 1939 by a member of the Communist Party named Richard Wright. In that novel, Native Son, the opening scene, one of the opening scenes is the main character, Bigger Thomas, and his friend, they're at the movies, and they see a newsreel of Hitler. And Bigger Thomas starts ranting to his friend about how he wishes that black people had someone to fight for their race like Hitler. And he's in awe of Hitler. Why? Well, American newsreels are demonizing him. And he's saying, I'm going to fight for my race. I'm going to, I can see that. I can see that, American Autopsy. You've got a point, and that you're against the American establishment on the one hand. On the other hand, black people in America are oppressed because of their race. And they hear this guy who's up there talking about our race, the Germans, I'm going to fight for my race. My race will stand up. You might be sympathetic to that. And that's not the same thing as some white dude who's just full of bigotry and likes Hitler because he's into white supremacism. And that there is nuance to all of this. And people don't seem to understand this at all. And there's no interest in this whatsoever. And that's one of my grievances with the synthetic left is that it's like the synthetic left, they're not interested in communism. They're interested. They have this theory. If you watch ContraPoints and her stupid video, about what is it like, I am not a fascist is exactly what a fascist would say, right? It's the stupidest shit. And it's just like, their worldview is that there are people who agree with me and there is Nazis. And it's like, no. It's much more complicated than that. Much more complicated than that. The British Empire committed mass genocide, promoted racial supremacism, promoted Malthusianism and eugenics, and they were long before Hitler. They were killing millions of people. They killed millions of people in Asia. They killed millions of people in Africa. They killed millions of people in the Caribbean. I mean, they were mass murderers too. And, breadtube, there's no, they don't get mad at anyone for promoting Britain, right? It's just, but if anyone says anything that looks slightly like maybe like Hitler, they don't get it. They don't get it. I don't know anything about that, Brighton, but it's these people don't get it, right? And that, it's like everyone's a Nazi, everyone's a fascist, everyone's a Nazi. And it's like, there were, the British Empire, Western liberal capitalism is genocidal and murderous also. Everyone who's bad is not a Nazi. I mean, there's a lot of bad people in this world who promoted genocide and mass murder, colonialism, eugenics. There's a lot of bad, evil forces in the world that weren't the Nazis. Okay? And so if your worldview consists of, well, there's people who agree with me and then everyone else is a Nazi, it's like, well, maybe can people be part of the other bad too? I mean, It's just the idiocy of these people. They created this meme where it's like Trump supporters are Nazis. No, they're not. They're not Nazis. No, they're not. I mean, they are not. They are not. Trump supporters are not Nazis. You could argue that there are things about Trump supporters that are similar to Nazis, but, there are things about, Trump supporters that are similar to the British Empire. There are things about Trump supporters that are similar to mainstream politicians. Trump supporters are huge Zionists, and Israel has committed horrendous crimes. There was one Palestinian leader. I can't even remember his name. He's like the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem or something. And he was one Palestinian leader. He was a Palestinian. And he, again, who was the colonizer of Palestine, right? Balfour Declaration. It was the British. So there's some Palestinian leader who didn't like the British. Oh, God forbid he not like the British. We all love the British Empire, even though they killed millions of people, right? There's this Palestinian, the Grand Mufti or whatever. And yeah, because the British, were sending the settlers into Palestine. Balfour Declaration. The British are setting up, colonies in Palestine of the Jewish settlers. Because of that, there's this Palestinian leader, the Grand Mufti or whatever, who says positive things about Hitler. And Israel says this means that Palestinians are responsible for the Holocaust. I kid you not. That is what they teach in Israeli schools. They say, well, these people, the Palestinians, they are the people, they were involved in the Holocaust. No, the Palestinians had their homeland occupied by the British Empire, and Hitler was fighting the British Empire. That's all there is to it, right? But that's how Zionists talk, right? Whenever this line that you hear, right, and I've said this before, and it's interesting, I'm waiting for somebody to discover one of these idiots. They never watch any of my material. I'm waiting for the day one of these idiots finally watches enough of my material to know that I've made this argument to flip out. But breadtube's ideology and worldview is a Zionist worldview. It's a Zionist worldview. That's what it is. It is a Zionist propaganda worldview. And so then they're going to say, oh, see, Caleb says breadtube is a Jewish conspiracy. That's not what I said. But the worldview, all right, among Zionists nowadays, there's two flavors of Zionism. On the one hand, the first flavor of Zionism is what they call right-wing Zionism, right? And that's like Netanyahu supporters. Those people are racist. They're racist. I mean, they admire South Africa. I used to work at an insurance company with some of these folks, and they will point to South Africa and the problems of South Africa, and they'll be like, see, that proves what happens when you hand over a country built by civilized European people to the black man. They're racist, right? Right-wing Zionists are just straight up racist, right? And they that's the Netanyahu supporters. They think Muslims or Islam is an evil cult, and, they want to outlaw Islam and whatever, right? But then they are not the prevailing dominant view among American Jews. They have a lot more power and influence than they did at one time, but they are probably a minority among American Jews. They vote Republican. They like Netanyahu, and they are increasingly a majority in Israel, right? In Israel, that is becoming the majority opinion because of all the settlements and all the, Eastern European Jews who moved there after the fall of the Soviet Union, etc. But in America, the primary viewpoint among American Zionists is not right-wing Zionism. It's not Likud Zionism. It's not, this blatantly white supremacist thing. The primary view among American Zionists is what's called liberal Zionism. And liberal Zionism is a very, very different ideology. Liberal Zionism isn't going around saying that, that brown people are inferior, that, that apartheid in South Africa was good. Okay. Liberal Zionists are very different in their worldview. The way liberal Zionists see things, right? They think that all of world history is a giant conspiracy against the Jews. That's what they believe. It's very different than what Trump and the Netanyahu folks believe. The way they see it, all of world history revolves around the Jews, and all non-Jews deep down are Nazis. That's what they believe, right? And that all of human history is a story of Jews escaping escaping the evil plot by Nazis, right? And that their entire worldview is that there are two types of people, Jews and Nazis. And that's how they see the world. That's it. That's what they believe. That's what breadtube believes. That's what breadtube believes. Listen to Vosh's stream. Every debate he has, somehow someone gets made into a Nazi because he's a liberal Zionist. And he may say he's against Israel and all that, but his worldview is there's the Jews and Nazis. And like he will show clips of me and I'll be ranting against the rich. Why doesn't he just say Jews? Because I don't mean Jews, because I'm not talking about Jews. But this is how liberal Zionists think. And they traumatize their kids. They send their kids to these expensive elite private schools where they show them nothing but Holocaust porn all day long. They watch nothing but movies about the Holocaust. They traumatize them. They scare them. And they tell them that deep down, all non-Jews are Nazis and want to kill all Jews. Right. And that they're terrified of non-Jews. They're convinced that there's this vast and I've talked, having lived in New York City long enough, I've met these people. I was informed by a woman who claimed to be a communist that, quote, everyone in Ohio believes that Jews have horns and tails. Everyone in an entire U.S. state of Ohio believes that Jews have horns and tails. I am from Ohio. I spent my entire childhood up until I was 23 years old. I lived in Ohio. Never in my life have I ever met anyone who thinks that Jews have horns and tails. Nobody thinks that. No one is stupid enough to think that Jews are like born with horns and tails. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But liberal Zionists believe this. And they brainwash their kids to believe it. That's what we do in Ohio. We just sit around all day, talking about, oh, that Hitler was a great guy. I want to kill me some Jews. That's what we do, right? Because that's deep down, Gentiles and non-Jews, we're all bloodthirsty, murderous anti-Semites. And all we do is we sit around talking about how much we hate Jews. And if you ever hear one of us talking against capitalism, it's just code for Jew. If you ever hear any of us talking against bankers, just code for Jew. If you ever hear any of us protesting the wars, well, that's because we think the wars are all just a big plot by the Jews, and we want to, and that all of us Gentiles, because we're not Jews, we're born with this, brain problem where we just want to murder Jews all the time. And it's bizarre because nowadays, most Zionists in America are not Jewish. Most Zionists in America are, let's just be real, most Zionists, supporters of Israel in America, are Christians, or evangelical Christians. And in fact, evangelical Christians overwhelmingly, part of being an evangelical Christian in America at this point is being a huge supporter of Israel. However, if you ask people that are liberal Zionists, they think all evangelical Christians want to murder Jews. They are out of touch with reality. They are out of touch with reality. That's what they are not in touch with reality, right? And they are brainwashed from the time they're kids, and that they believe like the cross is an anti-Semitic symbol. I'm not exaggerating, right? They believe that, the cross, if you wear a cross around your neck, you're saying that the Jews killed Jesus and that you support the Holocaust. That's what they think. Right? It doesn't occur to them that maybe they're wearing a cross because Christianity is their religion and that they worship Jesus Christ who was killed on a cross. No. They're trained from the time they're kids that if they see someone wearing a cross means kill all Jews because Jesus was killed by Jews and it's the Christ killer myth. That's the level of like deranged thinking that liberal Zionists have. All Christians, all non-Jews were all just ruthless anti-Semites. Everyone in Ohio, I was told, like they were sure, they knew it was a fact. Everyone in Ohio thinks that Jews have horns and tails. That's what I was told. I was told that every single person in Ohio thinks that Jews are born with horns and tails. I've never met anyone who thinks that. But liberal Zionists are so brainwashed and they're so traumatized from the time they're kids, and they're pumped full of this ideology that, right-wing Zionism is based on racism. Right-wing Zionism is about racism. Liberal Zionism is about victimhood. It's about victimhood. It's this belief that Jews are the eternal victims. Right? And it gets weird. Like, for example, when the Native Americans, during the 1970s, Native Americans started calling what was done to their people genocide, which it was, right? Native Americans have suffered from genocide. Well, liberal Zionists started protesting Native American events because only Jews have suffered genocide. And so by Native Americans saying that they suffered from genocide, that proved the Native Americans were anti-Semitic. Like, that's how liberal Zionists think, right? The Voshes of the 1970s were protesting outside of Native American events because clearly these Native Americans are saying that genocide was committed against them. They must be belittling the Holocaust. I mean, that's the way they think. The whole world revolves around the Jews, right? And all non-Jews, everything that non-Jews say is somehow a secret code for wanting to murder Jews, right? That's what they think. And it is deranged. And that's what Vosh thinks, right? If you listen to Vosh long enough, that's what he believes. He believes Christianity is an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Or conspiracy. That's what he believes, right? He sees that cross around someone's neck and he says, wow, that cross means that Jews murdered Christ and that therefore it's okay to kill all the Jews, right? He hears me say basic anti-capitalist stuff and he says, well, clearly, and he says on his stream, oh, that means kill the Jews. No, it doesn't. I'm not interested in Jews here, right? But this is how liberal Zionists think. And it doesn't matter if they denounce Israel or not. It's a mindset. It's a mindset. And what ContraPoints is not Jewish by heritage. She's not, right? But on her streams, if you watch her video, there's a vast secret Nazi conspiracy everywhere. There's a Nazi under every rock. There's a Nazi under every tree. Everything's a secret code for Nazi. That is a Zionist. That is liberal Zionism. That is straight up liberal Zionism. And there's no question around it. Yeah. That is called liberal Zionism. That is the liberal Zionist ideology. And that's what breadtube believes. It's not about socialism and the workers' struggle and the class struggle, right? That's not what it's about. It's about there's Nazis and people who agree with us. And everyone who doesn't agree with us, I'm sure if you dig deep enough, you can find the secret code where somehow they're Nazis, right? And it is a middle class ideology. It's middle class people. No one in their family has ever been in the military. No one in their family has ever been to prison. They've never met anyone who grew up in a trailer park, right? And and they have like an admiration for the black struggle, but it's weird, right? They don't really like black people. They don't really support the black freedom movement, right? Vosh compared a black nationalist who was talking about colonialism to a Nazi on his stream, if you can watch it. They like black people because black people are seen as victims of the white majority. They're victims of white Christians, so they like them for that reason. But they hate Minister Farrakhan. Oh, they hate Minister Farrakhan. And they don't even really like Malcolm X. Now they pretend to like Malcolm X now, but they don't really like Malcolm X, right? They see black people as innocent victims of the white majority of which are all anti-Semites deep down. Right? It is weird. It is very, very weird. And it's this condescending attitude toward black people. They don't really respect black people. They see black people as victims of the evil white American majority. And it's bizarre. It is bizarre to me. But anyway, I've talked about this for too long. But if you listen to the breadtubers long enough, you listen to ContraPoints, you listen to Thought Slime, you listen to Vosh, they're Zionists. Right. And I don't think a lot of them aren't Jewish. Right. I think like Thought Slime is like Italian or something, I believe. ContraPoints is like I think she grew up Episcopalian. She's from like a New England background. Vosh is Jewish, but their worldview is a Zionist worldview, which is there's a vast Nazi conspiracy, and all the red state people, even though evangelical Christians are all huge supporters of Israel for the most part, doesn't matter. Facts don't matter. Deep down, all the low-income white Americans want to murder all the Jews. That's what they believe, right? That deep down, all the people in Alabama that are white, all the people in Texas that are white, all the people in Ohio that are white, all of us are just sitting around talking about, them Jews that are born with horns and tails. We really ought to kill them all. We ought to kill them all because they're bad. We don't like our Jews. I mean, that's what they think. Right. And that all of us that are white and not Jewish, deep down, we have just had this seething hatred. We all just want to carry out another Holocaust. and they just know it's true. It has to be true. You know, I was told, this person swore to me, everyone in Ohio thinks Jews have horns and tails. No, they don't. Okay. You know, the Holocaust was a horrendous event, and it happened, and the pogroms, and, you know, this kind of mindset is the result of, years and years of trauma, of generational trauma. That's what this kind of mindset is the result of. I mean, when people are driven out of country after country after country, pogroms, and, you know, so it's not like, I'm not saying that these people are just stupid, right? I mean, the Holocaust, you know, 6 million people murdered. Okay. Obviously, if a people endures something that horrific, it's going to have an impact on them. Okay. It's going to have an impact on them. So let's not pretend that this mindset, the liberal Zionist mindset, let's not pretend that this victimization mindset didn't come about, you know, it didn't come about as a result of horrendous things that actually happened. But it's still a delusion. It's still a delusion. And I'm tired of it. I'm annoyed by it. And I'm annoyed by the way mainstream media plays along with it. I'm annoyed by the fact that these people have targeted me. I'm annoyed by the fact that communist and leftist spaces are dominated by people with this mindset that is utterly delusional and disgusting. You know, I'm annoyed by it. I'll just be honest. I'm annoyed by it, and I've had to deal with it. I live in New York City. I've lived in New York City for about a decade now, and I have had to deal with this kind of thinking. And it's out of touch with reality. It's delusional. And spaces that are supposed to be communist spaces are dominated by people with this bigoted mindset. And it's a bigoted mindset. It's bigoted. You know, that's all it is. And it's out of touch with reality. You know, low-income white evangelicals are huge supporters of Israel. But in their minds, no, low-income white evangelicals are all talking about how much they want to kill the Jews. No, they're not. No, they're not. Right. You know, all the Trump supporters are all Nazis, you know, and I'm tired of this mindset, and we should just call it out for what it is. And yeah, we can be honest about where it came from. And, you know, we can be honest about the fact that, no, they came by it honestly. I mean, it's years and years of trauma. But we should be honest about what it is. Breadtube, the mindset that they espouse is a Zionist mindset. It is. It is. And, you know, there are a lot of American Jews who have that mindset. But, you know, there's a lot of other people in the United States who don't have that mindset. A lot of people in the United States. So if they think that this is the way to make socialism and communism popular, I'm sorry. You know, if that's your worldview, right? If your worldview, which is Vosh's worldview, right? That all Trump supporters want to just, you know, sit around fantasizing about Auschwitz all day long. That's what Vosh thinks. If you listen to his stream, they're all Nazis. Every Trump supporter plus every communist who isn't like him. We all just sit around all day fantasizing about the next Holocaust. I mean, if that's your mindset, you're never going to lead a mass movement in the United States. You're never going to create socialism. So there we go. Okay. That's kind of a silly question there, but I'll answer it. Anyway, okay, next question. There were comments about me on Revolutionary Blackout Network, and they'd love to have you as a guest. That's great. I would happily go on that show anytime. I've been on there before. I like them. I'd happily go on there. Just tell them to reach out to me. I'll have to go look and see what they said about me. You know, I'd be amused, Kinky, to know how I came up in the conversation, but I harbor no resentment toward them. So yeah, again, I will work with anybody. I will be friendly to anybody. As a general rule, I will work with anybody, you know, but, you know, I have been targeted. And yeah, there we go. All right, next question. Red pill on Kronstadt. Kronstadt. I mean, Kronstadt was, Kronstadt, it took place. It was the fact that, you know, you had the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. A lot of different leftist factions supported it. There were three parties in the original government: the Bolsheviks, the left Mensheviks, and the left Socialist Revolutionary Party. And, you know, they all were part of it. And in Kronstadt, which is a port in Russia, there were sailors that were supporters of the Bolshevik Revolution. But they, these sailors, they were of the anarchist persuasion, and they did not like how the Bolsheviks were centralizing authority, right? They didn't like the fact that the Bolsheviks, in order to defeat all the countries that invaded after the Russian Revolution, they were centralizing authority. So they raised the slogan, Soviets without communists. That was the slogan that they raised. Soviets without communists, meaning they didn't want a central communist party. They just wanted autonomous Soviets without communists. And there was a war going on. I mean, 15 different countries invaded them. They were being attacked. And the Bolsheviks are saying, no, we need to centralize authority. And they're like, no, we just want to have our workers' council here that's autonomous and does whatever it wants, direct democracy, blah, blah, blah. And the Bolsheviks are like, okay, but we need to centralize the resistance because we're being invaded. These guys were like, no. So it was a period, it was a moment where there was, leftist on leftist violence, right? A group that had originally supported the Russian Revolution took up guns against the Bolsheviks, and the Bolsheviks had to put it down. And there was an armed confrontation, and it was, and a lot of these anarchists died. A lot of these anarchist sailors got killed. And the Bolsheviks viewed it as a tragedy because they shouldn't have had to fight with these guys. It should have been that these guys understood they needed a centralized authority, but they didn't. They didn't understand that. And it was a great tragedy. And this is called a two-line struggle. The main struggle was with the invaders, with the White Army. But within the Bolshevik camp, there arose a faction that was disruptive and problematic to the point that they took up arms against the Bolshevik government. And so there was a two-line struggle where the Bolsheviks, not only were they fighting the White Army, but they had to fight these anarchists. And the Kronstadt incident is viewed as a sad moment. It wasn't a good thing. It was not a good thing that it happened, but it happened. We know that some of those people escaped, they escaped over the ice, and they became professional anti-communists afterwards. And that, in, I forget what, Finland or Denmark or something like that, they were given medals for their heroic effort against the Bolsheviks, and they became just anti-communist propagandists, some of the ones that escaped. But yeah, I mean, it was a tragic incident. The Bolsheviks had to go kill a bunch of revolutionaries who weren't going to join with them. But this kind of thing happens, right? After a revolution, when you have a violent armed revolution, not a peaceful transition to socialism, when you have a violent armed revolution, it's not clear when it ends, right? The Russian Revolution, first the Tsar was toppled, then Kerensky came in. But then, a few months later, the Bolsheviks toppled Kerensky. Well, who's to say it was over? Well, the Bolsheviks said we're the new ruling party, and now it's over. Well, who's to say it's over, right? You're an anarchist, and you say, well, we got to have a new revolution against the Bolsheviks. So the Bolsheviks got to say, no, you don't, right? In Iran, a very similar thing happened, right? You had the overthrow of the Shah. You had Khomeini come to power, but then there were a lot of communists who said, well, we're going to overthrow Khomeini, and we're going to have full communism. Well, Khomeini said, no, you don't. No, you don't. There are a lot of, the Mujahideen Khalq that started bombing the Iranian parliament, killed 81 members of the parliament. These things, revolution is not a dinner party. And that I don't want a violent revolution in America. And you shouldn't want one either. Okay. And it annoys me. It annoys me when people they have this fantasy. You don't want to live through something like this. You don't want to live through a violent revolution. Violent revolutions are not good. A lot of people die in violent revolutions. People have to do things in violent revolutions, and violent revolutions only break out when it's a kill or be killed situation. When people have no choice, right? And you don't want a violent revolution, right? It's one thing to recognize that the ruling class are ruthless and evil and will do anything to hold on to their power, and there might be one because they force one. That's different. But you don't advocate it. If you're a serious scientific Marxist, you want a peaceful transition to socialism, right? You want a peaceful democratic transition to socialism. You just recognize that the ruling class might not allow it. And under the circumstances where they would be forcing people to defend themselves, you would support people's right to defend themselves. But you don't want a violent revolution. You got to be very clear about this. And people who don't understand this, I get attacked for this all the time. Oh, Caleb, you won't call for a violent revolution. You're a revisionist. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. Just shut up. Shut up. All right. You're a guy on Twitter and you can look at yourself in the mirror and jack off. I'm super revolutionary. Look at me. Yeah, I call for violent revolution. Caleb doesn't call for it. Look how revolutionary I am. Okay, that's great. Me, on the other hand, I'm actually building a real think tank. I'm trying to win average Americans to see socialism as the answer. Trying to get people to understand that Russia and China and Iran and Venezuela are not our enemies. I'm doing real work here. And the last thing that I want to do is to have average Americans believe that my goal is to tear up their country and their communities with violent civil war. I'm trying to actually get things done and to get people to understand that I love this country. I'm not trying to destroy it. It is necessary for me to make abundantly clear that I do not advocate a violent revolution. And I'm sorry if that ruins your video game fantasy, okay? But if you're going to really organize people and have real events and get real shit done and build a real network of anti-imperialists here in the center of the empire, you can't be going around advocating a violent revolution. You just can't do it. It's illegal. Not only is it illegal, it's not correct. Even if it was completely legal, I still wouldn't do it because I don't want that. I'm sorry. I have been to the Middle East. I have been in the Horn of Africa among crowds of Yemeni refugees. I have seen what happens in violent revolutions. Okay? And I don't want that to happen to my country. And you shouldn't want that to happen either. And if you want that for America, then, you have no business in American politics. If you want what's going on in Yemen right now to happen in your neighborhood, you're a nut, is what you are, right? Nobody who's actually lived through a violent revolution wants a violent revolution to happen in their neighborhood and their communities. One of the most interesting things in Iran, a lot of people in Iran are big supporters of the Islamic Republic. There's a lot of people in Iran that are neutral. And then there's some people in Iran in the wealthy neighborhoods that are against the Islamic Republic. But a lot of those people, they don't protest against the government and they don't support the anti-government activities. They hate the Islamic Republic. They're against the Islamic Republic, but they're not involved in the protests. And you know why? Because their parents lived through the Islamic Revolution. And as bad as they don't like the Islamic Republic and they hate the Islamic Republic, they know that if the overthrow of the Islamic Republic happened, then they'd have to go through that again. And they don't want to go through that again. They remember what it was like turning on the TV every night and, them rolling out another person who got shot. And they remember what happened when Iraq invaded Iran and communities were destroyed. And they're like, as much as we don't like the Islamic Republic, we don't want that to happen in our country again. So there's there's even some of these right-wing pro-American Iranians that are so traumatized by what it's like to live through a violent revolution that on that basis alone, they don't support destabilizing Iran. So I'm just telling you that, if you are actually serious and you actually have real experience in this world, you don't want a violent revolution. You don't. You don't. Violent revolutions happen. They happen. And, look, we got to support our troops. We got to support our troops. Our troops in Donbass right now, the Russian military, the Army of the People's Republic of Donetsk, the Army of the People's Republic of Lugansk. I mean, those are the real heroes of 2022. Those are the real heroes of 2022. Those people, those Russians who are fighting and dying right now to stop NATO expansion, to stop the bombing and the shelling of the people of Eastern Ukraine. Those are the real heroes. That Russian army, they are the greatest heroes in the world right now. You know, they are the real heroes. So, you know, we all need to be, you know, doing everything we can to tell about how they are the greatest heroes in the world right now. You know, hail the Red Army in Donbass. Hail the Red Army in Donbass. Those are heroes, right? But do you think they want to be doing that? Do you think they said, oh boy, this is going to be fun. Let's go have a violent revolution against the Ukrainian? No, they're doing it because they have to. Because they're defending their communities, they're defending Russia, they're defending Russian-speaking people from the murderous crimes of the Kiev government. They don't want to be doing that, and it's not fun. And they're doing things that you and I pray to God we never have to do. And think about the situations that the Russian soldiers are in. You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. So there you go. All right. Next question. Right. It's a long one tonight, but it's good. We're covering a lot of territory. What is the political significance of the pushback from the far right to extract concessions from McCarthy, and what does it foretell? Well, I mean, obviously it shows that Jimmy Dore was right? That the Republic, you know, the other party doesn't automatically get the speakership if this happens. And that was a lie. But the other thing that it shows is that, you know, again, this is hard for people to comprehend, but the right wing, the far right wing at this point, they are the revolutionaries in America. And they're not good. And what they believe is not good. And the policies they advocate are not good. But they're the faction that is fighting against the agenda of the bulk of the ruling class right now. So for whatever reason, that's the case. And so we need to be able to relate to the kind of people that support the MAGA movement and the far right of the Republicans. We have to find a way to talk to those folks. And if we're not, that's where the revolutionary energy is. Just like during in China, the peasantry, that's where the energy was. And Mao said, look, you're either going to get with the peasantry and find a way to lead the peasantry in their uprising, or you're just going to get left behind. We got to find a way that the kind of people that are going into MAGA right now become communists. And that's not easy. And it's going to be difficult. And we're not going to do it by stupidly pandering. We're not going to be doing it by condescendingly lecturing people. But we got to find a way to talk to these people. And that needs to be the focus right now, because that is where the energy of fighting the American political establishment is. These people want to fight the FBI. These people want to fight the Pentagon. These people don't want more money to Ukraine. That, if there's going to be any hope for anti-imperialism and socialism in America, it's going to come from these people. And I'm sorry that that's not politically correct. And I know that makes me like a Nazi collaborator. But it's true, okay? And that doesn't mean we agree with these people, but these are the people we have to learn to talk to. I mean, and if you're at all serious about Marxism and communism, if you're at all serious about it, you need to get with the Center for Political Innovation and figure out how we can talk to these people, because that's the only hope there is. And it's not easy, and it's going to be difficult, and you know, I mean, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's going to be popular. It'll get you canceled on Twitter. But the only hope there is for building any resistance to the U.S. empire right now is coming from that demographic. So if you're at all serious, about Marxism and communism, you got to find a way to talk to those people. And, you know, that's all there is to it. And I mean, you know, you can choose not to believe me and you can choose not to hear it, but I'm telling you the truth that you don't want to hear. That is where the resistance to the American deep state, the resistance to the imperialists and the big monopolies in America is coming from. And we have to find a way to position ourselves within that movement. You know, and it's not easy, and it's, you know, but it is what it is. So, you know, take it or leave it. That's why this protest on February 19th is so important. The protest that Nick Brana is organizing with the Libertarian Party is really important. You know why? Because it's with the Libertarian Party. Because PSL wants to wreck it. Because it's breaking the rules of leftism. And that's why it's so important. Right? That's why it's important. That's why it's far more important to be at Nick Brana's rally that's endorsed by the Libertarian Party than it is to be at some, you know, leftist demonstration. Because out of the movement to the masses. All right. I got a lot more super chats to get through. What a night. So someone says the weirdest thing on Reddit is they're asking for alternatives to striking and ways to revive the labor movement. Well, alternatives to striking. There was something called the strike on the job that the Wobblies used to do, right? It was where there would be like anonymous messages sent to the boss, and then stuff just starts breaking. Right? That was like the Wobblies. A tactic they would use is the IWW would like anonymously send a letter to the boss, like, we want this or whatever. And if you don't get it, things might go wrong. And then stuff in the workplace just starts breaking. They called it a strike on the job, right? And they would just start using sabotage and wrecking company property and breaking things down, until the boss gave them what they wanted. So, I mean, that's what comes to mind. And I know, like, William Z. Foster, when he broke away from the IWW, he had something called the Trade Union Educational League. And in their magazine, they just had advice about how to engage in sabotage, right? How to engage in this kind of activity. So there you go. There you go. The Wobblies didn't believe in signing union contracts. They said that if you signed a union contract, you'd be recognizing your boss's right to exploit you. So they couldn't ever, like, formally, they could have strikes, but they wouldn't be like formal strikes where the union says, if we don't get this, we will strike, and then it ends with an agreement, and they never could do it that way. So there you go. Thoughts on Christopher Hitchens? Well, Christopher Hitchens was a Trotskyite. He was like a Trotskyite liberal journalist in Britain. Right? I guess British politics are a little bit different. In Britain, the main left-wing party is called Labour Party. One of the worst moments of my life. My head was about to explode. I was in college. I was watching J.K. Rowling being interviewed by Jon Stewart. And it was one of the moments where I just wanted to scream at my television. My head was ready to explode. But Jon Stewart of The Daily Show is interviewing J.K. Rowling, and she's talking about her new book that she's written now that she's not writing Harry Potter anymore. And she's like, my new book, John, it takes place in a red area. In Britain, see, a red area is a left-wing area. I know in the United States, your red states are the conservative states, but in Britain, a red area is like a left-wing area. And Jon Stewart's like, yeah, why is that red is left in the UK? And over here, it's not. Why is red left in the UK? She's like, I don't know, John. I don't know why it's different over here. I have no idea. And Jon Stewart's like, yeah, I have no idea why. My head wanted to explode. Why in the world might left be associated with red in Britain, where the left-wing party is called the Labour Party? Oh, gee, I don't know. Why might a country where the leading left-wing party is called the Labour Party have left associated with red? Gee, it couldn't have anything to do with, like, Marxism, socialism, the labor movement, nothing like that or anything. No. That's just, I mean, it's like, it's amazing how much they've gone out of their way to just erase all the stuff we struggle to raise awareness about. Class struggle, Marxism from consciousness. My head was ready to explode. But anyway, in Britain, because Britain, they have the Labour Party, and especially in the 70s and 80s, like a long time ago, the equivalent of like Rachel Maddow in Britain was a Trotskyite, right? Obviously over here, that's not the case, but Christopher Hitchens, he talks like this. Yeah, I'm Christopher Hitchens, and I'm Trotskyite. I believe in the working class, the class struggle, but I don't like the Soviet Union much. I just don't care for them. The Soviet Union is an authoritarian regime. It's oppressing people, you see, and I just don't like them. I'm Christopher Hitchens, he was just this left-wing journalist. He wrote a book about, he wrote books. These people that are like leftists who become right-wingers, they always have like an interesting career trajectory, right? So Christopher Hitchens, he wrote a book about Mother Teresa, and it was a critique of Mother Teresa that was like a leftist critique. Mother Teresa, she sounds like such a good person, but actually she was very, very bad. She was tied in with the government of Enver Hoxha in Albania, and he like wrote a left-wing book. Like Mother Teresa is like a saint, in leftist circles or in like mainstream society. So he wrote this left-wing critique of her, and he wrote like leftist journalism, but he was always an anti-communist. He was always on the side of British imperialism against, the global resistance. His story is that the Islamic Revolution of Iran was the turning point. that he saw the Islamic Revolution of Iran happen. And I just couldn't believe that all these leftists were supporting a backward theocratic fascist like Imam Khomeini. I mean, Khomeini was clearly just a backward theocratic fascist, and all these leftists were supporting him. And I just couldn't understand why they would do such a thing. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. He didn't support the Islamic Revolution of Iran. He wrote an autobiography that came out like right before he died. And in that book, he claimed he was still a Marxist. He supported Bush's invasion. He became more and more of a conservative in the 90s, but he claimed he was still a Marxist, but he just thought that he was pro-imperialism. And that, that's kind of, there's a certain school of thought among certain intellectuals, like neocons, where it's like, they like the Marxist worldview. They like the dialectic and history driven forward by conflict. And they like Marx in its own way, but they think the West is the best. The West is the most advanced. And all the anti-imperialist countries, they might say they're socialist, but it's actually third world neo-feudalism is what it is. And I have no interest in following third world neo-feudalism. I mean, it's stupid. Well, and that Christopher Hitchens, I mean, if you listen to him, he's just a pro-imperialist. He believes in Western capitalism and imperialism, and maybe he believed that eventually Western capitalism would turn into socialism, but he was more concerned about supporting Western capitalism against third world anti-imperialism. And that's the thrust of what he writes about, and he hated religion, right? Religion he saw as a remnant. He was a defender of liberalism. He was a defender of liberalism against illiberalism. And Marx was too, right? You remember Marx was anti-religion. Marx was against feudalism. Marx was part of, he came out of the feudal uprisings against, or the uprisings against feudalism, the Spring of Nations of 1848. So Marx, the part of Marx that's, all that is solid melts into air, and, ruthless criticism of all that exists. And, he likes that, right? So his main target was religion. He hated third world anti-imperialist countries like Iraq. He supported Bush's invasion of Iraq. And if you watch his statements, they're all, there's a certain worldview, this kind of elitist liberal worldview. And that's what he was. And it aligned him with the neoconservatives. But he claimed in his autobiography, and up until his death, he claimed he was a true Marxist. He just took the liberal part of Marx. Marx tearing things down, ruthless criticism of all things, etc. And some of the things that Christopher Hitchens said were just bullshit. One of the things he would always talk about going to North Korea. Oh, you think religion is good. I've been to a country where everyone's pious and religious all the time. You know what it's called? It's called North Korea. It's called North Korea. If God existed, it would be just like living in North Korea. God existed, there'd be someone watching your every move, telling you what to do. That sounds a lot like North Korea. If I want to believe in God, I should just move to North Korea and have Kim Jong-un watch me all the time. Blah, blah. And he hates North Korea, right? He just hates North Korea. North Korea, they might be an atheist country, but they worship a god called Kim Jong-il. That's what they do. And he's doing that, right? One of the things he says in his book, and it's evil. It's an evil lie. This is what he says. I went to North Korea, and, the people there are so racist. One of the things that they were mad about is that Korean women had sex with African-American men, and that there are half-black Koreans in the South. And, they're racist against American blacks. Well, if you look at the facts, in North Korea, there are loads of African refugees who live there. They built the Independence Monument for Senegal. There are loads of black people in North Korea. A lot of African revolutions. Eldridge Cleaver lived in North Korea. Eldridge Cleaver's daughter was born in North Korea. Okay? So the idea that North Korea hates black people, that's ridiculous. However, what they were talking about was that there were a lot of American soldiers in South Korea, foreign occupiers in South Korea. And the fact that Korean women would have sex with the foreign occupiers Yes, North Korea found that to be disgusting, and they called that out. And they said, wow, these Americans that killed millions of Koreans, the fact that Korean women are having sex with those Americans, that's disgusting. It's not about hating black people. It's about opposing foreign occupation. But Christopher Hitchens is just a liar. He's a lying shill for imperialism. Oh, these people in North Korea are mad that women in South Korea have sex with black men. I mean, they might as well be racist white supremacists from the South. Oh, I was just so horrified. Oh, shut up. Shut up. Shut up, Christopher Hitchens. Shut up. And I mean, I listened for a while. I was on a kick. I listened to like all of his atheist debates, and he made a lot of money doing that. He went to like every evangelical Christian college and debated the local pastor or whatever. And, he made a lot of money. They paid him lots of money to do it. I mean, it was a great way to make money. He became Mr. Atheism, when the new atheist thing was going strong. And he agrees with Fox News on a lot of things. So it was a little easier for him. But anyway, that's my thoughts on Christopher Hitchens. All right. What do you think about psychiatry in the USSR and socialist countries in general? Well, look, I mean, I don't know. Where do you begin? I mean, I guess it's widely reported that dissidents in the USSR were declared insane, right? And if that happened, that's wrong. Okay. Obviously using psychiatry to suppress political dissidents is always wrong, right? You shouldn't use psychiatry for that purpose. I will say I did have an interesting conversation one night. I was in a bar in New York City. There was a guy from Belarus. And this guy from Belarus, he hated Lukashenko. And he said, oh, Lukashenko's awful. He's a communist dictator, blah, 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 blah. And he said, oh, they say Belarus is a good country, that we have no homelessness. Well, they just throw all the homeless people in mental health facilities. Right? That was what he said. He said, they just throw the homeless people in mental health facilities. And I said to him, well, aren't you guaranteed a job in Belarus? He said, yeah. I said, aren't you guaranteed housing in Belarus? He said, yeah. So I said, so if you're still homeless in a country where you're guaranteed a job and you're guaranteed housing, aren't you crazy? I mean, I think you are crazy. And he's like, oh, yeah. That was his brilliant argument against communism. It was like, oh, in communism, the only reason there's not homeless people in Belarus under Lukashenko is because they just put them all in mental hospitals. And I pointed out to him that if there is guaranteed housing and there is a guaranteed job from the government and someone is still homeless under those circumstances, they probably belong in a mental hospital. And I mean, if somebody, think about it, right? I mean, it just kind of made sense to me, but I mean, look, I do know that I believe Freudian psychoanalysis was widely practiced among the Soviet bureaucracy, which is interesting. And I wish I knew more about that. I know like Sabina Spielrein, she was a very important person in the history of psychoanalysis. She was treated by Carl Jung and eventually by Sigmund Freud, and then she became a psychoanalyst herself. And then she moved to Russia, and she was there until she was killed in the Holocaust. I mean, until during World War II, they killed a lot of Soviet Jews, and the Nazis took over the area she was in, and she was killed. But Sabina Spielrein, who's a very important person in the history of Freudian psychoanalysis, lived out most of her life in the Soviet Union, and she was a psychoanalyst in the Soviet Union. And that Freudianism had a lot of impact in the Soviet Union. There's a very good document. I'm going to see if I can find it. I've posted it in the chat before, but if you really want to learn what Freudian psychoanalysis is about, there's a very good document. There's a very good book. It was published in the UK. It was published in the UK. And it was published in the UK. And it was published in the UK, and it's like an attempt at I can't remember the name of it's like Red Books or Red something, Banner Press, or there's a very good book, and there's a PDF of it online. I'm trying to find it. Red Star Publishers, that's what it is. There's a website, Red Star Publishers, that has uploaded it. And it's a very good book. It was published in the UK during the 1930s. And it's an official, like, British Communist Party publication by a Freudian psychoanalyst showing overlap between Marxism and Freudianism. And I'm going to drop the link in the chat. I found it to be, honestly, one of the most clearly written explanations of Sigmund Freud and what he stood for that I've ever read. And I learned it from the Communist Party of Britain and their book. Here it is. It's called Freud and Marx, Red Star Publishers. They published the PDF of it. It's by R. Osborne. Freud and Marx. It's published in 1937. It's called Freud and Marx, a dialectical study. I really recommend this. Read this. I mean, I think if it's not, if there's a way, it would be good for the CPI to republish this book as a print book, because you will understand Freudianism. You will understand it based on reading this text. I'm dropping the link in the chat. I really recommend it. And that was published 1937. It is the height of Soviet, Stalin. It's the Stalin era USSR. And it actually has some very brilliant insight. Honestly, if you read this book, it explains why patriotic socialism is so important. I don't want to give too much away. Maybe I should revisit it, and pull some quotes from it or something. But if you read this book, you'll understand why it's necessary to be patriotic, why it's necessary to be sympathetic to Christianity. They talk about how people develop subconscious attachments to ideas. I mean, it's a really good text. It is a really, really good text. Read Marx and Freud, a dialectical study. It's very clearly written. It's the style, this writing style. Anything that the Communist parties published in the 1930s, they didn't publish incoherent academic gibberish. They published stuff that was meant to be read by millions of people. And it was very clear and to the point. And they explained their ideas in very clear language. And this text, it explains Sigmund Freud's ideas and how they overlap with communism in very, very clear language. I recommend it. I really, really recommend this text. So there you go. All right. Someone says even Bill Cooper changed his mind. Bill Cooper is he was a right-wing guy, like a John Birch Society kind of right-wing guy. And he wrote Behold a Pale Horse, and someone's saying he did or didn't believe in UFOs or something. So there you go. All right. To both sides, foreign aid in Africa is idiotic. I agree. Yeah, the role that Russia and China are playing in Africa versus the role of the United States in Africa, you can't compare it. I mean, I'm sorry that Russia and China are raising Africa out of poverty. They're doing great stuff. So there you go. Trump may be a Zionist, but not MAGA in general. Exactly. And I am convinced that beneath the surface, there's a lot of anti-Israel sentiments in America that gets kind of ignored and looked over. So there you go. There you go. What's a worse psyop, the Red Scare or the Red Fascism Scare? Well, obviously the Red Scare, my friend. I mean, they might call me a Nazi, but I haven't been thrown in prison yet. Red Fascism is a disinformation operation, but the Red Scare involved the execution of the Rosenbergs, the Makarin Internal Security Act that talked about putting communists in concentration camps. I mean, hundreds of people were thrown in prison. I mean, you can't compare. Okay, yes, the communists are all secretly Nazis. It's really nasty what's been done to me and what's been done to other people. I mean, I've suffered a lot, and I mean, they've really viciously gone after me, but I'm not in prison. I have a decent job. My wife and I live a comfortable life. Things could be a lot worse for me. I mean, I'd appreciate if my reputation weren't smeared all over the internet and nasty lies weren't told about me, but things could be a lot worse. So, of course, the Red Scare where the Communist Party USA was forcibly broken up and people were dragged before congressional committees was a lot worse than what's going on right now. So let's keep some perspective. You always think that the situation that you're in is the worst, and it's not. And it's important to keep perspective about that. You got to be thankful for what you have. You know what I mean? Shit may be bad in your life, but there's always someone who's got it worse than you. And there's always somebody who's got it better than you. And no matter how good your life gets, there's always going to be somebody who's got it better than you. There's always going to be somebody who's got it worse from you. So that's how it works. And so, yeah, obviously the actual Red Scare where the communists were all being rounded up and put in prison, and it's far worse than people being having their reputation smeared. So on that note, folks, I am going to end tonight's stream. It's been fun. We did another 3 hours. There you go. There you go. All right, folks, here we go. All right. It's been fun. We'll be back. If not, probably tomorrow night. If not, Monday for sure. new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Thank you, everybody. Remember that we need a government of action to fight for working families. Good night.